Grandpa, why is his tummy buzzing? That was the innocent question that turned my granddaughter's 10th birthday party into a federal crime scene. When I looked into Zoe's confused eyes and then at the expensive limited edition teddy bear she was holding, my blood ran cold. I did not just feel cotton inside that toy. I felt hard edges. I felt cold metal. And worst of all, I felt a vibration that no toy should have. I ripped open the seams of that innocent-looking gift, and I did not find love from her grandparents. I found a death sentence with a GPS tracker attached. My name is Frank Moore. I spent 30 years as a forensic accountant for the FBI tracking dirty money and dirtier people. I thought I had left that life behind, but when my son's in-laws tried to use my family as a disposable pawn in their game, they forgot one thing. They forgot that I know how to count, and I always make sure the numbers balance. Before I tell you how I brought down a criminal empire with a pocket knife and a sewing kit, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family should protect you, not frame you. I pulled my 10-year-old Ford into the driveway of the house my son Tyrell could barely afford. The brakes squealed a little, a sound that made my daughter-in-law Victoria cringe from the front porch. She was standing there with a glass of wine in her hand at 2 p.m, watching me like I was a stain on her pristine suburban driveway. I checked the envelope in my jacket pocket. It was a savings bond for Zoe. $50. It was not much, but on my pension, it was what I could do. It was real money. Clean money, not like the credit-fueled illusion Tyrell and Victoria were living in. I stepped out of the car, feeling the November chill in my bones. Victoria did not smile. She just took a sip of her wine and pointed with her chin towards the door. "You are early." "Frank," she said, her voice flat. "The caterers are not even set up yet. Try not to get grease on the carpet, we just had it professionally cleaned." I ignored the jab. I had dealt with cartel bosses who had better manners than my son's wife. I walked past her into the hallway. The house smelled of lavender and desperation. I know the smell of financial ruin. It hides under the scent of expensive candles. I saw a stack of unopened mail on the side table shoved behind a vase of fresh lilies. I recognized the red stamp on the corner of the top envelope. Final notice. Tyrell was drowning, and from the look of Victoria's new diamond earrings, she was the one holding his head underwater. I found Tyrell in the kitchen. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a hushed whisper. "Please, just give me 2 more weeks," he was pleading. "The check is clearing. It is just a bank error." He stopped when he saw me. He hung up the phone too quickly and forced a smile that looked like it hurt his face. "Hey, Dad," he said. He looked 10 years older than 35. His eyes were rimmed with red, the look of a man who had not slept through the night in months. "Everything okay, son?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Tyrell looked at the kitchen door to make sure Victoria was not listening. "Yeah, Dad, just work stuff. You know how it is. The market is tough." I wanted to shake him. I wanted to tell him that I knew he had co-signed a loan for Victoria's father, Richard Sterling. I wanted to tell him that I had seen the public records. But today was about Zoe. Just then the doorbell rang. It was not a normal ring. It was the heavy, insistent buzz of a delivery service. We all went to the door. A delivery man in a brown uniform was wrestling a box the size of a refrigerator up the walkway. "Sign here," he grunted. Victoria's eyes lit up. She clapped her hands together, the wineglass dangerously close to spilling. "Oh, it is finally here." She looked at me with a smirk that could cut glass. Mom and Dad felt so bad they could not make it from the Hamptons, so they sent something special, something exclusive. Tyrell helped drag the box into the living room. Zoe came running down the stairs, her braids bouncing. "For me," she screamed. Victoria handed her a pair of scissors. "Careful, sweetie, this is very expensive." "Open it gently." Zoe sliced the tape. The flaps fell open. Inside, nestled in layers of premium tissue paper, was a bear. It was a massive thing with golden fur that looked like real mohair and eyes that seemed too realistic. It wore a little velvet vest with gold buttons. "It is a stiff Victoria," announced loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "A collector's item. Dad said there are only 50 of these in the world." Zoe squealed and wrapped her small arms around the bear's waist. She tried to lift it out of the box. "Oh, he is heavy," she laughed. She pulled him out and hugged him tight, burying her face in his fur. I watched, forcing a smile. My $50 bond felt like a piece of scrap paper in my pocket. But then Zoe's expression changed. She pulled back slightly, rubbing her chest. "Ouch," she said. Victoria frowned. "What is it?" "He poked me," Zoe said. "Something inside his tummy is hard. It poked my rib." Victoria laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Do not be silly, Zoe. It is just the internal frame. These are high-quality bears. They have skeletons so they can pose. It is not a cheap carnival toy like your grandpa would buy." The insult landed, but I was not focused on that. My training kicked in. High-quality bears have internal armatures, yes, but they are wrapped in thick batting. A child should not feel a sharp edge through the fur. I stepped forward. "Let me see him, baby," I said. I knelt down next to Zoe. She pushed the bear towards me. It was heavy. Too heavy. A bear this size should weigh maybe 5 pounds. This felt like 10. I ran my hand over the golden fur. It was soft, but underneath the texture was wrong. It was lumpy. I pressed my palm against the bear's stomach. I felt it. A rectangular block. Hard plastic. Wrapped in something crinkly. And next to it something else. Smaller. Cold. Metal. I spun the bear around. Victoria was busy pouring more wine, bragging to Tyrell about how generous her parents were. I looked at the back seam of the bear. The fur was brushed over it, hiding the stitch line. I pulled the fur apart. My breath hitched. The thread was wrong. It was a slightly different shade of gold. And the stitch pattern, that was not a machine stitch. That was a running suture stitch, the kind a surgeon uses, or someone trying to close a hole quickly and cleanly. This bear had been opened and re-sewn. Grandpa Zoe whispered, leaning in close. "Why is he humming?" I froze. I pressed my ear against the plush chest of the toy. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator and Victoria's chatter, but it was there. A low electronic buzz, and then a tiny click. "Give me the bear, Zoe," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Why?" she asked. I stood up, hoisting the bear in my arms. "I am going to put him in your room for you. We do not want to get cake on him, do we?" Victoria turned around. "Frank, leave it there. It is the centerpiece." I ignored her. I was already moving towards the stairs. "I will be right back," I called over my shoulder. "Just going to set him on the bed." I did not go to the bedroom. I went straight to the guest bathroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking not from age but from adrenaline. I placed the bear on the granite counter. I pulled out my pocket knife, the one I have carried since Vietnam. "I am sorry, bear," I whispered. I slid the blade into the vertical seam on the back. The thread snapped with a satisfying pop. I sliced upwards, opening a 4-inch gap in the golden fur. I reached my hand inside, pushing past the white polyester stuffing. My fingers brushed against thick plastic sheeting. I grabbed the edge and pulled. A package wrapped in heavy-duty waterproof tape slid out. It was heavy. I squeezed it. It felt like rocks. But it was what was underneath the package that made my heart stop. Buried deep in the center of the stuffing, wired to a battery pack, was a small black box. On the side of the box, a tiny red LED light was blinking. Blink, blink, blink. It was an active GPS tracker. I looked at the screen of the device. It showed coordinates and a signal strength bar that was full. My son's in-laws had not sent a gift. They had sent a beacon, and they were tracking it. Someone knew exactly where this bear was, and if my gut was right, they were not checking to see if Zoe liked it. They were waiting for it to arrive. I looked at the package of rocks again. I used the tip of my knife to slit the tape. A stream of light hit my eyes. It was not rocks. It was diamonds. Rough, uncut diamonds. Dozens of them. And nestled among them a watch. A Patek Philippe. I recognized it instantly from the news. This was from the Sterling heist that Richard Sterling had claimed insurance on just 3 days ago. He had stolen his own assets, claimed the insurance money, and then mailed the stolen goods to his granddaughter's bedroom to hide them. I stared at the blinking red light. They were going to frame my son. Or worse, they were going to lead someone right to my granddaughter's door to collect the goods. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Grandpa Zoe called out, "Cake time!" I shoved the package back into the bear. I had to think fast. I had maybe 30 seconds before they came looking for me. I looked at the bear, then at the window. I knew exactly what I had to do. The numbers did not add up, and when the numbers do not add up, people get hurt. But not today. Not my Zoe. I opened the bathroom window. I needed a distraction, and I needed a needle and thread. Fast. The bathroom door was locked, but I still leaned my weight against it. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs that I had not felt since my days in the field. I placed the golden bear on the cold granite of the sink vanity. It sat there looking innocent with its glassy eyes and stitched smile, but I knew better. I was about to perform an autopsy on a childhood toy. I took a deep breath and let the persona of Frank the grandfather slip away. In his place, Agent Moore returned. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing leveled out. I was efficient. I was cold. I was ready. I used my pocket knife to extend the incision I had started downstairs. I did not just rip it open. I cut the threads one by one with surgical precision because I knew I might need to sew this thing back together to buy us some time. The golden fur parted, revealing the white polyester filling. It looked like snow, but it felt synthetic and cheap. I reached in. My fingers brushed against the internal armature, the skeleton that allowed the bear to pose. But wrapped around that plastic spine was something that did not belong in a factory in Germany or a toy store in Manhattan. I pulled out the stuffing in handfuls, dumping it into the clean sink. Buried deep in the center torso was a layer of heavy-duty industrial plastic. It was black and taped shut with duct tape that smelled of chemicals. This was professional waterproofing, the kind drug runners use when they drop packages in the ocean for pickup. Why would a teddy bear need to be waterproof? Because they did not care about the bear. The bear was just a shipping container. If the house flooded, or if the bear was thrown in a dumpster, the cargo had to survive. I sliced through the black plastic. Inside, I found 5 distinct packages. They were vacuum sealed. The plastic was tight against the contents. I set them down on the marble counter one by one. Thud, thud, thud. They were heavy, dense. The 5th item was the GPS unit I had felt earlier. It was a military-grade tracker, small, black, and pulsing with that terrifying red light. I grabbed a towel from the rack and wrapped the tracker in it, hoping to muffle the signal even slightly, though I knew it was futile. They knew exactly where this bear was. I turned my attention to the packets. I picked up the first one. I carefully cut the seal. The smell of stale air and old metal hit me. I tipped the contents into my palm. Diamonds. Not the polished, shiny things you see in a jewelry store window. These were rough, uncut stones. They looked like dull glass pebbles to the untrained eye, but I knew better. I held one up to the harsh bathroom light. It was cloudy, but the size was staggering. This was easily 10 carats. In the right hands, it could be cut into a stone worth $500,000, and there were 20 of them in just this one bag. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my jeweler's loop. I have carried it on my keychain for 40 years. Old habits die hard. I brought the small lens up to my eye and picked up the largest stone. I rotated it slowly, looking for the laser inscription. Most legitimate diamonds have a microscopic serial number etched onto the girdle. Stolen diamonds usually have them polished off, but these were rough stones. They should not have markings, unless they were part of a monitored shipment. I found it, a tiny string of numbers and letters etched so faintly it was almost invisible. GIA followed by a sequence I recognized. My blood ran cold. I did not need a computer to know what this was. I have a memory for numbers. It is a curse and a gift. This sequence was from the Vanguard repository heist. It happened 10 years ago in London. A vault containing conflict diamonds seized by Interpol was raided. The stones were supposed to be evidence in a war crimes trial. Instead, they vanished. And now here they were, sitting on my son's bathroom counter in suburban America. I put the diamond down and opened the next packet. A watch. It was heavy gold with a cracked face. A Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. I turned it over. The back was engraved. The letters were worn but legible. S.M. Salvatore Moretti. The name hit me like a physical blow. Moretti was a mob boss who ran the eastern seaboard docks in the 90s. He was murdered 5 years ago and his body was never found. Rumor had it he was buried with his favorite watch. I set the watch down next to the diamonds. The picture was coming together, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. These were not just stolen goods. This was a collection. A portfolio of high-value, untraceable assets, the kind of stash a criminal keeps for a rainy day, or the kind of payment used to settle a debt between cartels when cash is too risky to move. I opened the remaining packets. Bearer bonds, gold coins from the Spanish colonial era, a flash drive encrypted with military-grade protocols. This was millions of dollars, tens of millions, and Richard Sterling, my son's father-in-law, had sent it here. I leaned against the sink and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked old. tired, but my mind was racing at 100 miles an hour connecting the dots. Richard was not just a failing businessman. He was a fence, a money launderer. He was the guy criminals went to when they needed to hide their wealth. But something had gone wrong. He was desperate. That is why he faked the robbery at his own house. He needed the insurance money to pay off someone dangerous, but he could not lose the assets, so he had to move them. But where do you hide $10 million in hot merchandise when the FBI and the insurance investigators are watching your every move? You do not put it in a safety deposit box. You do not bury it in your backyard. You mail it to the one place no one would ever look. You mail it to your 10-year-old granddaughter. The cruelty of it made me nauseous. They had turned my innocent Zoe into a mule. If the police raided this house, Tyrell would be the one holding the bag. The bear was addressed to his house. The tracking number was under his name. Richard would play the grieving grandfather, claiming he had no idea how those terrible things got into the toy. Tyrell would go to prison for 20 years. Zoe would be put in foster care or worse, given to Richard and Meredith to raise. And the Sterlings would walk away with the insurance money and eventually come back to collect this stash when the heat died down. It was a perfect frame job. Tyrell was the perfect patsy. He was in debt. He was desperate. A jury would believe he stole these things to pay his mortgage. Richard had played on my son's weakness and his desire to please. He had weaponized Tyrell's love for his family against him. I looked at the pile of treasure on the counter. It was radioactive. Just touching it felt dangerous. I had to get it out of here. I had to get it away from Zoe. But I could not just throw it in the trash. The GPS tracker was still blinking on the towel. If I moved it too far or destroyed it, whoever was watching that signal would know. Suddenly, the phone in my pocket buzzed against my leg. It was not a ring. It was a single long vibration. A text message. I froze. Only 3 people had this number. Tyrell, my doctor, and the alarm company for my house. I pulled the phone out slowly as if it were a bomb trigger. The screen was bright in the dim bathroom. The number was blocked. No caller ID. I swiped the screen to open the message. The text was short, brutal, and it confirmed my worst nightmare. I know you have it, old man. Do not turn off the GPS. If the signal dies, Tyrell will have a very unfortunate car accident on his way to work tomorrow. I stared at the words until they blurred. They were watching. They were not just tracking the bear. They were watching the house. They knew I was in the bathroom. They knew I had found it. The game had changed. This was not just about theft anymore. This was a hostage situation, and my entire family was in the kill zone. I looked at the GPS tracker again. It blinked red once, twice, like a heartbeat, a countdown. I shoved the phone back in my pocket. I needed a plan, and I needed it 5 minutes ago. I grabbed the sewing kit I had spotted in the vanity drawer. It was time to operate. I looked at the golden bear sitting on the marble vanity and then at my watch. It was 2 a.m. I had less than 4 hours before the sun came up and the house woke up. If Zoe woke up and found her new best friend missing, the alarm would be raised. If Victoria found the bear gone, she would call her father immediately. I had to move, and I had to move fast. My years in the Bureau taught me that when you cannot control the evidence, you have to manufacture it. I needed a doppelganger. I needed a bear that looked enough like this limited edition German masterpiece to fool a 10-year-old girl and her hungover mother from across the room. I locked the bathroom door from the outside using a small pin key I kept on my ring. I moved silent as a ghost down the hallway. My knees popped slightly with every step, a reminder that I was not the young agent I used to be, but my adrenaline compensated for the arthritis. I slipped out the side door into the biting November air. The wind cut through my jacket, but the cold helped clear my head. I got into my Ford and rolled it down the driveway in neutral before starting the engine. I could not risk waking Tyrell. Finding a high-end toy store open at this hour was impossible. I had one option, the 24-hour supercenter off the interstate. I drove with one eye on the road and one eye on the rearview mirror, checking for tails. The text message about Tyrell's accident was burning a hole in my pocket. They were watching, but hopefully they were watching the GPS signal, which was currently stationary in the bathroom. I was betting my life that they were tracking the device and not my physical car. The store was a fluorescent-lit purgatory of shift workers and insomniacs. I marched straight to the toy aisle. The selection was bright cheap and made of polyester. I scanned the shelves desperately. Pink unicorns, blue dogs, neon green aliens. Then I saw it. On the bottom shelf, squeezed between a fire truck and a dollhouse, was a bear. It was the right size. The fur was a golden brown, slightly darker than the stiff, and the eyes were plastic buttons instead of glass. It was a $20 imitation of a $500 work of art. It would have to do. I grabbed 2 of them, just in case I ruined one during surgery. Then I sprinted to the pet supply aisle. I needed a tracker. Not a military-grade one, but something that blinked. I found a flashing LED safety light for dog collars. It pulsed red. It was perfect. Finally, I grabbed a bag of aquarium gravel. I needed dead weight. The real bear was packed with diamonds and gold. The fake bear could not feel like a bag of feathers. I paid cash and drove back to the house, parking a block away and walking the rest of the distance through the neighbors' yards. I slipped into my own garage, which sat detached from the main house. This was my sanctuary. It smelled of motor oil and sawdust. I turned on a single work light over my bench. It was time to build a counterfeit. I took the cheap store-bought bear and laid it on the workbench. I took my knife and slit its back open. The stuffing inside was garbage, loose and lumpy. I pulled it all out. Now came the engineering. I took the aquarium gravel and filled several heavy-duty Ziploc bags, wrapping them in duct tape to prevent them from shifting or making noise. I weighed the bags on my postal scale until they matched the weight of the diamond packages exactly. Precision is the only difference between a good lie and a bad one. I placed the gravel bags into the torso of the cheap bear, packing the cheap stuffing around them to soften the edges. Then I took the flashing dog collar light. I wrapped it in a thin layer of cotton so the light would be diffuse and pulsing just like the GPS unit. I buried it deep in the chest cavity. I checked the feel. I squeezed the stomach. It felt hard. It felt heavy. It felt dangerous, just like the real one. Now for the cosmetic surgery. The fur on the cheap bear was too shiny. I took a piece of fine grit sandpaper and gently roughed up the fibers, taking away the factory sheen. I used a little bit of motor oil on a rag, just a dab, to darken the golden hue to match the antique look of the stiff. I stepped back. Under the dim light of a bedroom to a sleepy child, it would pass. It had to pass. I left the fake bear on the bench and turned my attention to the real problem. The cargo. I had millions of dollars in illicit goods sitting in a gym bag at my feet. I could not leave them in the garage. If Richard sent his goons, they would tear this place apart. I walked to the corner of the garage where my old hydraulic car lift stood. Under the heavy steel plate of the left post, there was a hollow space in the concrete foundation. I had chiseled it out 20 years ago to hide my personal files from the bureau when I retired. A little insurance policy I never thought I would use for this. I used a crowbar to pry up the floor plate. The hole was dark and dry. I took the packages of diamonds, the watch, the bonds, and the drive. I wrapped them all in a thick oilcloth to protect them from moisture. I lowered the bundle into the hole. Then I took the real GPS tracker. This was the tricky part. I could not bury it or the signal would die and Richard would execute his threat. I looked around the garage. My eyes landed on the rafters. The wood was thin and the roof was uninsulated. It was radio transparent. I took the real GPS unit and climbed the ladder. I taped it to the top of the highest rafter right near the vent. It would keep broadcasting its signal telling Richard that the package was safe at my location. Let him think I stole it for myself. Let him come to me. I replaced the floor plate and bolted it down. The diamonds were buried under 6 inches of concrete and steel. I grabbed the fake bear and killed the lights. The sky was beginning to turn a bruised purple in the east. Dawn was coming. I ran back to the house, my breath forming clouds in the air. I unlocked the side door and crept inside. The house was silent. The silence of a family sleeping on top of a landmine. I made it to the bathroom and swapped the bears. I put the real gutted, stiff bear into my duffel bag. I placed the fake gravel-filled bear on the vanity. No, that was wrong. Zoe had it in her room. I had to put it back in her room. I walked up the stairs. Every creak of the wood sounded like a gunshot. I reached Zoe's door and pushed it open inch by inch. She was asleep, tangled in her pink duvet. I tiptoed to the bedside table. I gently placed the fake bear next to her sleeping head. The red light pulsed faintly from inside its chest. It looked demonic. I turned to leave and my heart slammed into my throat. A shadow was standing in the doorway. It was Tyrell. He was wearing his bathrobe, his hair messy, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. He looked at me, then at the bear, then back at me. "Dad," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep and suspicion. "What are you doing in here?" I froze. My mind cycled through a dozen lies. I settled on the partial truth, the most dangerous kind. I could not sleep. Son, I whispered back, moving into the hallway and pulling the door shut behind me so Zoe would not wake. I heard a noise. I thought maybe the wind blew the window open. I just wanted to check on her. Tyrell looked at me. He looked at the duffel bag in my hand. The bag that contained the empty skin of the real bear. "What is in the bag, Dad?" "Laundry," I said. My voice was steady, but my palms were sweating. I spilled some coffee on my shirt earlier. I did not want to leave a stain, so I was going to run it down to the washer. Tyrell rubbed his face. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who was carrying the weight of the world and was slowly being crushed by it. He did not look at the bag again. He just looked at me with a sadness that broke my heart. "You are acting weird, Dad. Ever since the party started, you and Victoria, everyone is acting weird." He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. "Is it about the loan? Did she tell you?" I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and tell him everything. I wanted to tell him that his father-in-law was a monster and his wife was an accomplice. But I could not. Not yet. If he knew, he would panic. He would confront Victoria, and Richard would make good on his threat. Ignorance was the only armor Tyrell had left. "Go back to bed, son," I said, patting his arm. "We will talk in the morning. Everything is going to be fine. I am just an old man with insomnia." Tyrell lingered for a second longer, searching my face for something, maybe a lifeline. Then he nodded slowly and turned back to his bedroom. I waited until his door clicked shut before I let out the breath I had been holding. I went downstairs to the guest room and shoved the duffel bag under the bed. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair by the window watching the driveway, waiting for the black SUV or the police cruiser that I knew would eventually come. The sun rose, painting the suburban lawn in deceptively cheerful light. I heard the sounds of the house waking up, water running in the pipes, the smell of coffee, the normal sounds of a life that was about to be obliterated. My phone rang at 8:00 sharp. I looked at the screen. It was Richard Sterling. I answered on the first ring. I did not say hello. "Good morning," Frank Richards' voice came through the speaker. Smooth, cultured, like expensive bourbon poured over razor blades. "I hope you slept well. I know these family gatherings can be exhausting for a man of your age." "What do you want, Richard?" I asked. "I want to invite you to dinner," he said, his tone shifting to a sickeningly sweet register. "Tonight, at my house. Just family. We need to have a serious conversation about Tyrell's future. I think there are some opportunities we should discuss. And bring the bear. Zoe forgot it here in her dreams, didn't she? I would hate for her to be separated from her gift." I gripped the phone tight enough to crack the plastic. He knew. He was reeling me in. "I will be there," I said. "Excellent," Richard purred. "Do not be late. And Frank, drive carefully. The roads can be so dangerous this time of year." The line went dead. I looked at the black screen of my phone. The invitation was not for dinner. It was for an execution. But Richard made one mistake. He invited the hunter into the lion's den, and he forgot that I was bringing my own appetite. Driving up the winding gravel driveway to the Sterling estate always gave me a migraine. It was not the altitude or the glare of the setting sun hitting the windshield of my 10-year-old Ford. It was the smell of old money rotting from the inside out. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking the city like a feudal castle, but to my trained eye it looked more like a tomb. The hedges were trimmed, but I noticed brown patches of neglect near the roots. The fountain in the center of the circular driveway was dry, its stone angels covered in a layer of grime that spoke of months without a maintenance crew. Richard Sterling wanted the world to see a palace, but I saw a balance sheet bleeding red ink. I parked my car next to Tyrell's leased sedan. My son walked over to help me out of the driver's seat. His hand was trembling slightly. Victoria was already at the massive oak front doors fixing Zoe's hair and hissing instructions about posture and manners. I leaned heavily on my cane. I did not really need it today, but it was part of the costume. Tonight I was not Frank Moore, the forensic accountant. I was just Frank, the old man with a bad hip and a fading memory. I needed Richard to look at me and see a nuisance, not a threat. The door swung open and Meredith Sterling stood there. She was wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my car, but her smile was tight. It did not reach her eyes. It never did. "Frank," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We were afraid you might get lost. The roads are so confusing at night." I smiled back a vacant, confused smile. I just followed the GPS, I said, tapping my pocket where my phone sat. Wonderful invention. Helps me find the grocery store, too. We stepped into the foyer. The crystal chandelier overhead was dim. 2 of the bulbs were burnt out. I noted that immediately. A man like Richard Sterling would never allow a burnt bulb in his grand entrance unless he could not afford to call the electrician. The air inside was cold. They were keeping the heat low to save money. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me and shuffled my feet. Richard appeared from the library. He looked thinner than the last time I saw him. His suit was impeccable, but his eyes were darting around like a trapped animal. He walked straight to Zoe, ignoring Tyrell completely. "There is my birthday girl," he boomed, bending down to hug her. "And where is Mr. Bear? Did you bring him?" Zoe nodded. "He is in the car," she said. "Mom said he was too big for the dinner table." Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked at Victoria. "Go get him," he said. The tone was not a request. It was an order. "I want to see him. I want to make sure he's holding up." Victoria scrambled out the door to the car. I watched Richard. He was sweating. A light sheen of perspiration on his upper lip despite the chill in the house. He rubbed his hands together. "Frank, come in, come in. Can I get you a drink?" "We have a lovely aged scotch." I waved my hand dismissively. "Oh no, doctor's orders," I said, making my voice quaver. "My stomach cannot handle the good stuff anymore. Just tap water for me, maybe with a slice of lemon if you have it." I shuffled into the dining room. The long mahogany table was set for 6. The silverware was heavy sterling silver, but as I sat down I noticed the dust outlines on the walls where paintings used to hang. The Rembrandts were gone, sold or pawned. The room echoed with the emptiness of a fortune that had evaporated. A man I did not recognize walked in to pour the water. He was not the usual catering staff. He was thick-set with a neck like a bull and hands that looked like they had broken more bones than they had served plates. He wore a cheap white shirt that strained against his biceps. As he leaned over to fill my glass, I saw it. Just a glimpse as his collar shifted. A tattoo of a spider web on the side of his neck with a small teardrop caught in the silk. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my hand steady as I reached for the glass. That was not a decoration. That was a badge. Specifically, it was a mark used by the mid-level enforcers of the West Coast syndicates. Richard Sterling was not just laundering money, he was in bed with the kind of people who solved problems with concrete shoes. This man was not a waiter. He was a guard. He was here to make sure the transaction happened. Victoria returned carrying the bear. My heart was in my throat. This was the fake bear. The one filled with aquarium gravel and a dog collar light. If Richard looked too closely, if he checked the stitching, if he noticed the fur was slightly different, we were all dead. "Put him right there," Richard said, pointing to the empty chair at the head of the table. Victoria placed the bear on the chair. It sat there, slumped slightly, its plastic button eyes staring blankly at the crystal glasses. The red light inside its chest pulsed rhythmically. Blink, blink, blink. Richard stared at the light. He was mesmerized. I could see the greed in his eyes. He was not seeing a toy. He was seeing $10 million in diamonds and a way out of his debt. He let out a long breath, his shoulders relaxing. "He looks heavy," Richard said, taking a sip of his wine. "Solid. German engineering." Zoe giggled. "He is super heavy, Grandpa Richard. I can barely carry him. He feels like a bag of rocks." Richard laughed. A loud booming sound that bounced off the empty walls. "That is quality, my dear. That is what quality feels like. Nothing but the best for my granddaughter." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "What do you think, Frank? A bit better than the plastic junk you usually buy her, right?" I took a sip of my water. My hand shook intentionally, spilling a few drops on the tablecloth. "Oh, it is very nice," I mumbled. "Very fancy. I do not know about these modern toys, though. Why does it blink like that? Seems like it would keep the child awake." Richard smirked. "It is a heartbeat monitor, Frank. It simulates life. Something you might not understand. You are used to simpler things." The dinner was an agonizing performance. We ate roasted chicken that was slightly dry and vegetables that tasted like they came from a can. Richard spent the entire meal boasting about non-existent business deals. He talked about a new merger in Tokyo, a development project in Dubai. Lies. All lies. Tyrell ate in silence, his head down. Victoria chimed in occasionally, echoing her father's delusions. I played my part. I asked about the price of gas. I complained about the neighborhood kids playing music too loud. I asked Meredith for her biscuit recipe 3 times, pretending I had forgotten the answer. By the time dessert arrived, Richard had completely dismissed me. In his eyes, I was just a senile old fool who was lucky to be at his table. But I was watching. I watched the enforcer standing by the door, his hand hovering near his waist every time a car drove past outside. I watched the way Meredith's hand shook when she lifted her wine glass. I watched Richard checking his watch every 5 minutes. He was waiting for something, or someone. As we finished the meager dessert, Richard stood up. "Well, this has been lovely," he announced. "But I have some business calls to make, Tyrell. Why don't you and Victoria take Zoe home? It is getting late." "Wait," Zoe said. "I need Mr. Bear." "No," Richard shouted. The room went silent. Zoe shrank back in her chair. Richard composed himself quickly, smoothing his tie. "I mean," he said, his voice lowering to a whisper, "I think Mr. Bear should stay here tonight. Grandma and I miss him. We want to spend a little time with him. We will bring him over tomorrow." Zoe looked at me. I knew this was the moment. If we left the fake bear here, Richard would open it within 10 minutes. He would find the gravel. He would know. I cleared my throat. "Actually, Richard," I said, my voice scratching like dry leaves, "Zoe has been having nightmares. The doctor said she needs a comfort object. If she does not have the bear, she screams all night. Keeps Tyrell awake. And you know Tyrell has that big presentation tomorrow. He needs his sleep." I looked at Tyrell. "Say something, son," I willed him silently. Tyrell looked up. "Yeah," he said softly. "She really needs it, Richard. She won't sleep without it." Richard's jaw tightened. He looked at the bear, then at the enforcer by the door. The enforcer gave a barely perceptible nod. "Fine," Richard spat. "Take it. But be careful with it. That bear is worth more than your entire house, Tyrell." We stood up to leave. The tension in the hallway was thick enough to choke on. I helped Zoe into her coat. Victoria picked up the bear. I watched her hands strain under the weight of the gravel. It was a good fake. A damn good fake. We walked out into the cold night air. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was premature. As Tyrell was buckling Zoe into the car, Richard stepped out onto the porch. He walked over to where I was standing by my driver's side door. "Frank," he said. I turned. He was standing close. Too close. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. "You know, Frank," he whispered, leaning in so his lips almost touched my ear. "I was reviewing Tyrell's insurance policies the other day. As his financial advisor, I have to say he is very well covered." I gripped the door handle. "Is that so?" I asked. "Yes," Richard hissed. "Double indemnity for accidental death, car accidents, fires, that sort of thing. If anything were to happen to him, Zoe would be a very wealthy little orphan, and of course, as her closest living relatives, Meredith and I would have to step in as guardians. We would manage everything, including her inheritance." He pulled back and smiled, a shark's smile in the moonlight. "Drive safe, Frank. The roads are slippery. And keeps your eyes on that bear. You never know when something valuable might just disappear." He turned and walked back into his mausoleum of a house. The heavy door slammed shut with a sound like a coffin lid closing. I got into my car. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was not an act. It was rage. Pure, cold rage. He had just threatened to kill my son and take my granddaughter to pay off his gambling debts. He thought he was the predator. He thought I was the prey. I started the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror at the fake bear sitting on Zoe's lap in the car behind me. The red light blinked in the darkness. "You want a war, Richard," I whispered to the empty car. "You just declared one, but you forgot one thing. You are fighting a man who has nothing left to lose but his family, and I have hunted bigger monsters than you." I put the car in gear and drove down the hill. I did not go home. I drove straight to the only place where I could finish this. My garage. It was time to weaponize the truth. I needed to make a phone call to an old friend at the bureau, but first I had to make sure my son knew exactly who he was sleeping next to. The game of charades was over. Tonight the masks were coming off. I drove home from the Sterling estate with the taste of metallic water and bitter lies in my mouth. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned the color of ash. Richard Sterling thought he had intimidated an old man. He thought his threats about insurance policies and guardianship would send me cowering into the shadows. He made a fatal miscalculation. He forgot that before I was a grandfather, I was a hunter of financial predators. He had just given me the motivation I needed to come out of retirement. I pulled into my garage and locked the door behind me. I did not go to bed. I went straight to my office in the back of the house. It was a small room filled with filing cabinets and a computer that looked outdated to the naked eye, but was running software that could slice through corporate firewalls like a hot knife through butter. I brewed a pot of black coffee strong enough to wake the dead and sat down. It was time to follow the paper trail. In my 30 years with the Bureau, I learned one absolute truth. People lie. Witnesses forget. Evidence gets lost. But numbers never lie. Every dollar leaves a footprint, and Richard Sterling had been walking through mud for a long time. I started with public records. Richard's company, Sterling Global Ventures, was listed as a premier investment firm with holdings in real estate and technology. The website was glossy, featuring stock photos of smiling, diverse families and skyscrapers in Dubai. It looked legitimate. It looked successful. I dug deeper. I pulled the tax filings for the last 5 years. On the surface, they showed steady growth, but I knew where to look for the cracks. I looked at the auditor's notes and the footnotes of the quarterly reports. There were discrepancies, small ones at first. A change in accounting methods here, a delayed filing there. Then I saw the loans. Richard was borrowing money to pay off interest on other loans. It was a classic Ponzi structure. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Paul was getting impatient. I used an old backdoor access key I had kept from my consulting days to get into the credit rating agency's servers. It was illegal, but tonight the law was a luxury I could not afford. What I saw on the screen made my stomach turn. Richard Sterling was not just broke. He was underwater by $40 million. His assets were all leveraged to the hilt. The mansion on the hill had 3 mortgages on it. The cars were leased. Even the furniture was likely rented. I looked at the transaction history. The Tokyo merger he bragged about at dinner was a phantom deal. The company he was supposedly merging with had been dissolved 2 years ago. The development project in Dubai was a patch of sand that had been seized by the local government for non-payment. Richard Sterling was not a tycoon. He was a magician performing a trick, and the curtain was about to fall. But being broke is not a crime. Fraud is. I started looking for the source of his recent cash flow. If he was $40 million in the hole, how was he paying the electric bill? I found a series of wire transfers from shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Panama. These were not investment returns. They were structured deposits, just under $10,000 each to avoid automatic flagging by the IRS. This was money laundering 101. Richard was washing dirty money for someone else taking a cut to keep his lights on. Then I found the connection to the diamonds. A transfer of $200,000 to a logistics company in Antwerp just 3 days before the Vanguard heist. It was labeled as consulting fees. It was a bribe. Richard had paid someone on the inside to facilitate the theft. He was not just a fence. He was the architect. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. The picture was complete. Richard was desperate. The walls were closing in. The FBI had an open file on Sterling Global Ventures. I saw the flag in the system. They were building a RICO case. They were watching him. That explained why he needed to move the physical assets like the diamonds and the watch out of his house. He knew a raid was coming. My heart sank. If the FBI was watching Richard, they were watching everyone connected to him, including my son. I typed Tyrell Moore into the search bar. I prayed to see nothing. I prayed that my son's name would come up clean, linked only to his modest architecture salary and his mortgage. The screen populated with results. My breath hitched in my throat. Tyrell was listed as the managing director of 3 LLCs, North Star Logistics, Blue Horizon Imports, and Sterling Family Trust. I clicked on the documents. There it was, my son's signature, big looping and trusting. I opened the articles of incorporation for North Star Logistics. It was the company that had leased the warehouse where the stolen goods were likely stored before being moved. It was the company that had paid for the shipping of the bear. I opened Blue Horizon Imports. It was the entity that had received the wire transfers from Panama. I opened the Sterling Family Trust. It was the beneficiary of the insurance policy on the stolen items. Richard had not just framed Tyrell for the theft. He had set him up as the boss. On paper, Richard Sterling was just an advisor, a consultant. Tyrell Moore was the CEO. Tyrell Moore was the one signing the checks. Tyrell Moore was the one who would go to prison for 20 years for money laundering and grand larceny. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I almost knocked my coffee mug over. Tyrell did not know. I knew my son. He probably signed whatever stack of papers Richard put in front of him, thinking it was for a family investment or a tax break. Richard had played on Tyrell's desire to be accepted. He had groomed him. He had made him feel important. Here, son, sign this, and you will be a partner in the family business. And Tyrell, the boy who used to bring stray cats home because he could not stand to see them cold, had signed his own death warrant. I looked at the dates. The most damning documents were signed 3 months ago, right around the time Tyrell started looking so tired, right around the time Victoria started pushing for a bigger house. She knew. She had to know. She was the secretary on 2 of the corporations. I stood up and paced the small room. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact for Agent Miller, my old partner at the bureau. Miller was honest. He was tough. If I called him now and gave him everything I found, he would swoop in. He would arrest Richard. He would stop the bleeding, but he would also arrest Tyrell. The evidence was black and white. Tyrell's signature was on the documents. The stolen goods were tracked to Tyrell's house. In the eyes of the law, Tyrell was not a victim. He was a co-conspirator, maybe even the ringleader. The law does not care about naivety. Ignorance is not a defense. If I called the police, I would be sending my own son to federal prison. I put the phone down. I could not do it. I could not destroy my son's life to save it. I was on my own. I had to prove Richard was the mastermind and Tyrell was the dupe. But how do you prove intent when the paperwork says otherwise? I needed a confession. I needed Richard to say it out loud. I looked at the screen again. The FBI investigation was active, but it was slow. They were still gathering evidence. They did not know about the bear yet. That was my only advantage. I had the physical evidence they were looking for. And I had the GPS tracker. I sat back down and stared at the blinking cursor. I felt the weight of 68 years pressing down on my shoulders. I had spent my life believing in the system. I served the law. I trusted the process. But the system was a machine, and machines chew up soft things like Tyrell. Tonight, I had to be something else. I had to be a father first, and an officer second. I started printing the documents. The sound of the printer was rhythmic like a heartbeat. I needed a physical file. I needed leverage. If I could get Richard in a room, if I could make him think I was willing to trade the diamonds for Tyrell's freedom, maybe I could get him to slip up. Then the silence of the night was broken. A single soft chime echoed from the monitor on my desk. It was the perimeter alarm. I looked at the security feed. My camera system was old, but the night vision was sharp. The screen showed a grainy black and white view of my driveway. A figure was moving towards the garage. He was dressed in dark clothing, a hood pulled low over his face. He moved with a purpose. He was not looking at the house. He was looking at the garage door. I leaned closer to the screen. The figure stopped at the side door of the garage. He pulled something out of his pocket. It glinted in the moonlight. A lockpick set, or a key. My heart hammered against my ribs. They had tracked the GPS. They knew. Richard had lied about waiting until tomorrow. He sent someone to clean up the mess tonight. I looked at the timestamp on the video, 3:14 a.m. I opened my desk drawer. I pushed aside the stack of old tax returns and the box of paper clips. My hand closed around the cold steel of my service revolver. I had not fired it in 15 years. I hoped I remembered how. I checked the cylinder, 6 rounds. I looked at the screen again. The figure had opened the door. He was inside. He was in the garage. He was standing directly above where the diamonds were buried under the concrete. But he was not looking at the floor. He was looking at the ceiling. He was looking for the tracker I had hidden in the rafters. I stood up, my knees popping. I grabbed the gun. I turned off the monitor. Frank Moore, the accountant, was staying in this room. Frank Moore, the father, was going out to the garage. And God help the man standing between me and my family. I stepped out of the back door of the house, and the cold air hit me like a physical blow. It was the kind of cold that makes your joints ache and your breath hang in the air like a ghost. I had my service revolver in my right hand. It felt heavy and familiar, a weight I had not carried in years, but one that my muscle memory welcomed back like an old friend. The security monitor had shown the man entering the side door of my detached garage. He was inside my sanctuary. He was standing directly over the spot where I had buried millions of dollars in stolen diamonds. I did not rush. Rushing makes you sloppy, and at 68 years old, I do not have the luxury of speed. I have the advantage of terrain. That garage was my church. I knew every creak in the floorboards. I knew exactly where the oil slick was near the workbench. I knew where the shadows fell deepest when the streetlights filtered through the high windows. I reached the side of the garage and pressed my back against the siding. I listened. I could hear the faint sound of boots shuffling on concrete. He was moving slowly. He was looking for something. I reached for the breaker box on the outside wall. I installed it myself 10 years ago. One switch controlled the interior lights. Another controlled the power to the outlets. I flipped the main breaker. Inside the garage went pitch black. I heard a curse, a stumble, the sound of something metal clattering to the floor. Panic. That was my weapon. I slipped through the door, moving silently in the darkness. My eyes were already adjusted to the night. His were not. He was blind. I was a shadow. I moved to the left behind the stack of winter tires. I raised my weapon. "Freeze," I said. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice of a man who has held a gun on bad men before. It was flat, cold, absolute. Do not move. Do not reach for a weapon, or you will not leave this garage walking. I heard his breathing. It was ragged, fast. He was scared. "Good. Who is there?" he stammered. "I cannot see anything." I reached up with my free hand and pulled the cord on the high-intensity work light I had clamped to the shelf above me. I aimed it directly at his face. I clicked it on. 5,000 lumens of white, blinding light exploded in the darkness. He screamed and threw his hands up, covering his eyes. He stumbled back, tripping over the hydraulic jack I had left on the floor. He went down hard. I stepped into the light, keeping the gun trained on his center mass. It was the driver, the man with the spiderweb tattoo on his neck, the one Richard called a waiter but treated like a guard dog. I kicked the knife out of his hand before he could even think about reaching for it. I pressed the barrel of my revolver against his forehead. The metal was cold. His sweat was hot. "Give me one reason," I whispered. "Give me one reason why I should not bury you right here under the floorboards. No one knows you are here. No one would ever look. Please," he choked out. "Please, man. It is just a job." "Who sent you?" "You know who." "Sterling. He sent me." "Why tonight? Why not wait until the dinner tomorrow?" "He owes money," the driver said. The words were spilling out of him fast. Panic makes people honest. He owes the Vargas cartel. They gave him a deadline. Tomorrow night, midnight. If he does not have the diamonds or the cash, they are going to kill him. And they are going to kill his wife. I kept the gun steady. The Vargas cartel. That explained the desperation. That explained the sloppy frame job on Tyrell. Richard was not just greedy. He was a dead man walking, trying to buy a few more days of life with my son's freedom. "He told me the GPS was here," the driver continued. "The signal. It is coming from this garage. Where is it?" "Where are the diamonds, old man?" I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. I looked up at the rafters where I had taped the tracker. "You are looking in the wrong place, son." I grabbed him by the collar of his cheap leather jacket. I hauled him up. He was big, muscular, but he had no fight left in him. He was a bully who had run into a wall. "They are not here," I lied. My voice was steady. "Do you think I am stupid? Do you think I would keep a package like that in a garage with a lock a child could pick?" I moved them, where he asked. "That is none of your business," I said. I shoved him towards the door. "You go back to Richard. You tell him his tracker is lying to him. You tell him if he wants his property, he brings the paperwork to clear my son's name, and he brings it to me personally. No more errands, boys." I spun him around to push him out the door. As I did, my left hand slipped into his jacket pocket. It was a move I had practiced 1,000 times in crowded subway stations and busy markets. A sleight of hand. In the span of a second, I dropped a coin-sized listening device into the deep lining of his pocket. It was an old piece of tech, but reliable. It had a range of 2 miles. Enough to hear him make his report. "Get out," I shouted. Before I changed my mind, he scrambled out the door, slipping on the gravel outside. I watched him run to his car, parked down the block. I did not relax until I saw taillights fade into the distance. I locked the door and reactivated the power. I did not go back to the house. I went to my workbench and turned on the receiver. I put the earpiece in. Static hiss. Then the sound of an engine revving. Then the sound of a phone dialing. I listened. My heart was pounding, but my face was stone. pick up, the driver's voice came through the earpiece. He was hyperventilating. Then a click. Richard's voice. Well, do you have it? No, boss, the driver said. It is not there. The old man. He is crazy. He had a gun. He said he moved it. He said the tracker is a decoy. Silence on the other end. A long, terrifying silence. Then Richard spoke. His voice was no longer smooth. It was jagged, the voice of a cornered rat. He is lying, Richard hissed. Frank is smart, but he is not that smart. If the diamonds are not in the garage and they are not in the car, then there is only one place they can be. Where, boss? The bear, Richard snapped. The goddamn bear. He must have realized something was wrong with the original and switched it, but he would not have had time to move the diamonds far. If they are not with Frank, they are still at Tyrell's house. He probably panicked and left them in the toy thinking it was the safest place. So what do we do? The driver asked. Do you want me to go back to Tyrell's? Break in. No, Richard shouted. Too risky. If Frank is alert, he will call the cops the second you show up. We need to get into that house legally. We need someone else to kick down the door for us. I pressed the earpiece deeper into my ear. A cold feeling of dread washed over me. I knew what was coming. Call your contact at the precinct, Richard ordered. The sheriff. Tell him we have an anonymous tip. Tell him there is a large quantity of heroin hidden in a teddy bear at the residence of Tyrell Moore. Tell him the suspect is armed and dangerous. I want a SWAT team there within the hour. But boss, the driver hesitated. Tyrell is your son-in-law. He is collateral damage, Richard screamed. I need those diamonds back before the cartel arrives tomorrow. If Tyrell has to go to prison for drug trafficking so I can get my property back from police evidence, then so be it. Make the call. Now. The line went dead. I ripped the earpiece out. The silence in the garage was deafening. I had miscalculated. I thought Richard would come for me. Instead, he was sending a militarized police force to storm my son's house in the middle of the night. He was going to traumatize Zoe. He was going to destroy Tyrell, all to create a chaotic smokescreen so he could retrieve his stolen loot. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed the file of evidence I had printed. I did not have time to call Tyrell. I did not have time to explain. I just had to drive. I had to get there before the first battering ram hit the door. I had to get there before my granddaughter woke up to the sight of assault rifles pointed at her father's head. I threw the garage door open and peeled out of the driveway. My tires smoked against the pavement. I was 68 years old. I had bad knees and a heart condition. But tonight, I drove like a man possessed. I was racing the flashing lights, and I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that I would win. I stepped out of the back door and the cold November air hit me like a physical blow. It was the kind of cold that seeps through your clothes and settles deep in your bones, making your joints ache. I wrapped my fingers tighter around the grip of my service revolver. The steel was freezing against my palm, but it was a familiar weight, a comforting weight. It had been 15 years since I carried a weapon for work, but muscle memory is a powerful thing. My hand did not shake. My breathing was steady. I was not Frank the grandfather anymore. I was Agent Moore, and I had a perimeter breach. I moved along the side of the house, sticking to the shadows. The security monitor had shown the man entering the side door of my detached garage. He was inside my sanctuary. He was standing directly on top of the concrete slab where I had buried millions of dollars in stolen diamonds. He was looking for the tracker I had hidden in the rafters. He was looking for a payday. I reached the corner of the garage. I could hear him inside, the faint sound of boots scuffing against concrete, the metallic clink of tools being moved on my workbench. He was searching. He was taking his time. He thought I was asleep in the main house. He thought I was just a senile old man who forgot to lock his doors. I did not rush in. Rushing gets you killed, especially when you are 68 years old with bad knees. I had to use my head. I had to change the environment. I reached for the breaker box mounted on the exterior wall. I installed it myself 10 years ago when I rewired the shop. I knew exactly which switch controlled the interior overhead lights. I took a deep breath. I flipped the breaker. Inside the garage, the lights died instantly. I heard a curse, a loud, startled yelp followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. He had tripped. He was blind. I moved. I slipped through the side door, moving silent as a ghost in the darkness. My eyes were already adjusted to the night. His were not. He was flailing in the pitch-black panic rising in his chest. I moved to the left, stepping behind a stack of winter tires. I raised my weapon. Freeze. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the voice I used when I arrested cartel accountants in high-rise offices. It was flat, cold, absolute. Do not move, do not reach for a weapon, or you will not leave this garage walking. The shuffling stopped. I heard his breathing. It was ragged, fast. He was terrified. "Who is there?" he stammered. "I cannot see anything." I reached up with my free hand and found the cord for the high-intensity work light I kept clamped to the shelf above me. I aimed it directly at where his voice was coming from. I clicked it on. 5,000 lumens of white blinding light exploded in the darkness. He screamed and threw his hands up, covering his eyes. He stumbled back, tripping over the hydraulic jack I had left on the floor. He went down hard. I stepped into the cone of light, keeping the gun trained on his center mass. It was him. The driver. The man with the spiderweb tattoo on his neck. The one Richard Sterling had paraded around as a waiter at dinner just hours ago. He was wearing a dark hoodie and tactical gloves. A knife lay on the floor near his hand, where he had dropped it when he fell. I kicked the knife away. It skittered across the concrete and vanished under my workbench. I pressed the barrel of my revolver against his forehead. The metal was cold. His sweat was hot. "Give me one reason," I whispered. "Give me one reason why I should not bury you right here under the floorboards. No one knows you are here. No one would ever look. Please," he choked out. "Please, man, it is just a job. Do not shoot. Who sent you?" "You know who." "Sterling. He sent me. Why tonight? Why the rush? Why not wait until the dinner tomorrow?" "He owes money," the driver said. The words were spilling out of him fast. Panic makes people honest. "He owes the Vargas cartel. They gave him a deadline. Tomorrow night, midnight. If he does not have the diamonds or the cash, they are going to kill him. And they are going to kill his wife. And they said they would burn his house down with everyone inside." I kept the gun steady. The Vargas cartel. That explained the desperation. That explained the sloppy frame job on Tyrell. Richard was not just greedy. He was a dead man walking, trying to buy a few more days of life with my son's freedom. He had borrowed money from wolves to maintain his lifestyle, and now the wolves were at the door. "He told me the GPS was here," the driver continued. "The signal. It is coming from this garage. Where is it? Where are the diamonds, old man?" I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. I looked up at the rafters where I had taped the tracker. The little red light was blinking innocently in the shadows. "You are looking in the wrong place, son." I grabbed him by the collar of his cheap leather jacket. I hauled him up. He was big, muscular, but he had no fight left in him. He was a bully who had run into a wall. He was shaking. "They are not here." I lied. My voice was steady. "Do you think I am stupid? Do you think I would keep a package like that in a garage with a lock a child could pick?" I moved them. "Where?" he asked. "That is none of your business," I said. I shoved him towards the door. "You go back to Richard. You tell him his tracker is lying to him. You tell him if he wants his property, he brings the paperwork to clear my son's name. And he brings it to me personally. No more errand boys." I spun him around to push him out the door. As I did, my left hand slipped into his jacket pocket. It was a move I had practiced 1,000 times in crowded subway stations and busy markets. A sleight of hand. In the span of a second, I dropped a coin-sized listening device into the deep lining of his pocket. It was an old piece of tech I had saved from my bureau days, but it was reliable. It had a range of 2 miles. Enough to hear him make his report. "Get out," I shouted, before I changed my mind. He scrambled out the door, slipping on the gravel outside. I watched him run to his car parked down the block. I did not relax until I saw his taillights fade into the distance. I locked the door and reactivated the power. My hands were finally starting to shake. The adrenaline was fading and the reality of the situation was setting in. I was playing a dangerous game with dangerous men. I went to my workbench and turned on the receiver. I put the earpiece in. Static hiss. Then the sound of an engine revving. The driver was speeding. He was panicked. Then the sound of a phone dialing. I listened. My heart was pounding, but my face was stone. Pick up, the driver's voice came through the earpiece. He was hyperventilating. Then a click. Richard's voice. "Well, do you have it?" "No, boss," the driver said. "It is not there. The old man... He is crazy. He had a gun. He said he moved it. He said the tracker is a decoy." Silence on the other end. A long, terrifying silence. Then Richard spoke. His voice was no longer smooth. It was jagged. The voice of a cornered rat. "He is lying," Richard hissed. "Frank is smart, but he is not that smart. If the diamonds are not in the garage and they are not in the car, then there is only one place they can be. Where, boss?" "The bear," Richard snapped. "The goddamn bear." He must have realized something was wrong with the original and switched it, but he would not have had time to move the diamonds far. If they are not with Frank, they are still at Tyrell's house. He probably panicked and left them in the toy thinking it was the safest place. "So what do we do?" the driver asked. "Do you want me to go back to Tyrell's?" "Break in." "No," Richard shouted. "Too risky. If Frank is alert, he will call the cops the second you show up. We need to get into that house legally. We need someone else to kick down the door for us." I pressed the earpiece deeper into my ear. A cold feeling of dread washed over me. I knew what was coming. "Call your contact at the precinct," Richard ordered. "The sheriff. Tell him we have an anonymous tip. Tell him there is a large quantity of heroin hidden in a teddy bear at the residence of Tyrell Moore. Tell him the suspect is armed and dangerous. I want a SWAT team there within the hour." "But boss," the driver hesitated. "Tyrell is your son-in-law." "He is collateral damage," Richard screamed. "I need those diamonds back before the cartel arrives tomorrow. If Tyrell has to go to prison for drug trafficking so I can get my property back from police evidence, then so be it. Make the call. Now." The line went dead. I ripped the earpiece out. The silence in the garage was deafening. I had miscalculated. I thought Richard would come for me. Instead, he was sending a militarized police force to storm my son's house in the middle of the night. He was going to traumatize Zoe. He was going to destroy Tyrell, all to create a chaotic smokescreen so he could retrieve his stolen loot. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed the file of evidence I had printed. I did not have time to call Tyrell. I did not have time to explain. I just had to drive. I had to get there before the first battering ram hit the door. I had to get there before my granddaughter woke up to the sight of assault rifles pointed at her father's head. I threw the garage door open and peeled out of the driveway. My tires smoked against the pavement. I was 68 years old. I had bad knees and a heart condition. But tonight I drove like a man possessed. I was racing the flashing lights and I prayed to a God I had not spoken to in years that I would win. I could see the headlines already. Grandfather killed in standoff. Son arrested for trafficking. Family destroyed. Richard had written the script, but I was about to change the ending. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. The old Ford engine roared in protest. "Hang on, Zoe. Grandpa is coming." I could see the red and blue lights flashing against the low-hanging clouds long before I turned onto Tyrell Street. It looked like a war zone had descended on the quiet suburb. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, calculated fury. Richard Sterling had not just crossed a line, he had obliterated it. He had called down the thunder on his own family just to save his financial skin. I parked my car 3 houses down behind a media van that had already arrived. Vultures are always the first to the carcass. I pulled my collar up and walked toward the chaos. The front door of my son's house was hanging off its hinges. The wood was splintered where the battering ram had made contact. Inside, I could hear the shouting of men who were used to being obeyed. I stepped onto the lawn, staying in the shadows of the large oak tree. Through the broken bay window, I had a front row seat to the nightmare. Tyrell was on his knees in the center of the living room. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. He was wearing his pajamas, and he looked small, defeated. A SWAT officer in full tactical gear stood over him with a rifle pointed at the floor, but ready to rise. Tyrell was pleading. He was saying he did not know anything. He was begging them to let him check on his daughter. Zoe. The sound of her crying was a high, thin wail that cut through the thick atmosphere of aggression. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide with a terror that no 10-year-old should ever know. A female officer was trying to comfort her, but Zoe was shrinking away, looking desperately at her father. And then there was Victoria. She was standing in the kitchen doorway. She was not handcuffed. She was shivering, her arms wrapped around herself. Her face was pale. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. But the centerpiece of this grotesque tableau was Richard and Meredith Sterling. They were standing near the fireplace. They were fully dressed in heavy wool coats. They did not look like concerned grandparents rushing to the scene of a tragedy. They looked like supervisors inspecting a job site. Richard was speaking to the sheriff, a man named Higgins, who I knew had a gambling problem almost as big as Richard's. I saw Richard gesture aggressively toward the stairs. He was not waiting for procedure. He was demanding results. I moved closer, stepping onto the porch. The wind carried their voices to me. Sheriff Higgins shouted orders to his men. "Tear this place apart. We have a credible tip that the contraband is hidden in the structure. Check the vents, check the furniture, and check the child's room." Tyrell screamed. "No! Leave her alone. She is just a little girl." The officer standing over him shoved him down. "Stay down, Mr. Moore. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I watched two officers stomp up the stairs, their heavy boots shaking the frame of the house. Richard watched them go, his eyes hungry. He licked his lips. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. He thought he was minutes away from salvation. He thought the diamonds were just a flight of stairs away. Moments later, the officers returned. One of them was carrying the golden bear. It was the fake I had made in my garage, the cheap store-bought imitation filled with gravel and a flashing light. But in the dim lighting of the living room it looked convincing enough. "I found it, Sheriff," the officer announced, holding the bear up by one ear. It was on the bed right next to the girl. Richard let out a breath that he must have been holding for hours. He stepped forward, ignoring the police line. "That is it," he said, his voice trembling with greed disguised as outrage. "That is the bear. My God, Tyrell. You hid drugs in your own daughter's toy, you sick animal." He was playing to the audience. He was setting the narrative. Tyrell looked up, confused and broken. "Richard, what are you talking about? You gave her that bear." Silence. Sheriff Higgins barked. He took the bear from the officer. He placed it on the coffee table. It sat there, looking lumpy and sad, the red light inside pulsing faintly through the fabric. Blink, blink, blink. Richard moved closer. "Open it, Sheriff," he commanded. "We need to secure the evidence." Higgins pulled a large tactical knife from his vest. The blade glinted in the harsh light of the police flashlights. Zoe screamed when she saw the knife. "No, do not hurt Mr. Bear." Victoria finally moved. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out. "Mom, Dad, please stop. This is insane." Meredith grabbed Victoria's arm and yanked her back. "Quiet, Victoria. Let the men do their job." I watched from the doorway, my hand resting on the frame. This was it. The moment of truth. Higgins stabbed the bear. He drove the knife deep into the chest cavity, right where the red light was pulsing. He sliced downward in a violent, jagged motion. The fabric tore with a loud ripping sound. Tyrell flinched as if he had been cut himself. Richard leaned in, his eyes wide. He was expecting to see the black waterproof packages. He was expecting the glint of diamonds. He was expecting his future to spill out onto the table. Higgins reached his gloved hand into the incision. He grabbed a handful of the insides and pulled. He did not pull out diamonds. He did not pull out heroin. A stream of gray dust and small pebbles poured out onto the polished hardwood floor. It sounded like rain on a tin roof. Shh. It was kitty litter, aquarium gravel, and cheap polyester stuffing. The pile grew on the table, creating a small, dusty mountain. The red light, a cheap plastic dog collar blinker, fell out and bounced on the floor, spinning wildly. The room went silent. A dead, absolute silence. Richard froze. His face went through a spectrum of emotions that was terrifying to behold. Triumph turned to confusion. Confusion turned to disbelief. And disbelief curdled into pure, unadulterated horror. He clawed at the pile of gravel. He plunged his own manicured hands into the gut of the bear, digging frantically. He threw handfuls of stuffing onto the floor. "Where is it?" he hissed. "Where is it?" Sheriff Higgins looked at the pile of gravel, then at Richard. "This is it, Mr. Sterling. This is the contraband. It looks like gravel." "No," Richard roared. "It cannot be. It was heavy. I felt it. It was here." He grabbed the empty skin of the bear and shook it violently. Nothing fell out but a few grains of sand. Tyrell lifted his head. He looked at the mess on the table and he started to laugh. It was a hysterical, broken sound. "You raided my house for rocks. You broke my door down for gravel." Richard stood up slowly. His hands were covered in gray dust. He looked around the room, his eyes wild. He looked at Tyrell. He looked at the sheriff. And then he looked at the door. He saw me. I stepped out of the shadows and into the living room. I walked with a cane I did not need, letting it tap rhythmically against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. "Evening, Sheriff." I said, my voice calm and conversational. Higgins spun around, his hand going to his holster. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "I am Frank Moore," I said. "This is my son's house. And that is my granddaughter you are traumatizing." I walked past the officers who were too stunned to stop me. I walked straight to the coffee table and looked down at the pile of gravel. I picked up a handful and let it sift through my fingers. "You boys looking for something specific?" I asked. Or is the sheriff's department now investigating unauthorized landscaping supplies? Richard stared at me. His face was purple. You, he whispered. You switched it. I looked him dead in the eye. Switched what, Richard? It is just a teddy bear. Unless you thought there was something else inside. Something that maybe you did not want the insurance company to know about. Richard opened his mouth but closed it. He was trapped. He could not accuse me of stealing the diamonds without admitting he knew they were there. He could not tell the sheriff the truth without incriminating himself. He was checkmated in the middle of a police raid he had ordered. Sheriff Higgins looked nervous. He realized the bust was a bust. There were no drugs. Just a ruined toy and a very angry grandfather. Mr. Sterling Higgins said, his voice tight. You said there was heroin. This is sand. Richard was vibrating with rage. He needed to hit something. He needed to blame someone. He spun around and looked at Victoria. Victoria was standing by the kitchen island, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her father with fear. You! Richard screamed. You were the last one with it. You carried it to the car. Dad, no, Victoria stammered. I did not touch it. I swear. You lying little wretch, Richard yelled. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He did not see his daughter. He saw a traitor. He saw the reason his life was over. He raised his hand and struck her. The sound of the slap was louder than the battering ram. It echoed off the walls. Victoria's head snapped back and she fell against the counter, sliding down to the floor. Dad Tyrell shouted, struggling against his restraints. The room froze again. Even the corrupt sheriff looked shocked. Richard stood over his daughter, his hand raised for a second strike, his chest heaving. But in that silence, something broke. It was not just Victoria's lip which was bleeding. It was the chain of command. The fear that had held Victoria captive to her parents' will for 30 years shattered along with her trust. She looked up at him, her hand touching her cheek. Her eyes were not scared anymore. They were cold. They were Moore eyes, not Sterling eyes. I watched Richard realize his mistake. He had just turned his only ally into his most dangerous witness. And he had done it in front of a room full of police officers and a forensic accountant who was recording every second of it. That was a mistake, Richard said softly. A very expensive mistake. Richard looked at his hand, then at me. The realization of what he had done washed over him. But it was too late. The alliance was dead. And the war had just entered its final phase. The drive from Tyrell's decimated house to my quiet bungalow was the longest 3 miles of my life. My son sat in the passenger seat of my Ford, staring out the window at the passing street lights. He was shivering. It was not from the cold. It was the kind of deep, uncontrollable tremor that comes when your entire reality has been shattered by a battering ram. He was still wearing his pajamas and a coat one of the paramedics had draped over his shoulders. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to scrape his knees playing basketball in the driveway, not the 35-year-old architect who had tried so hard to build a perfect life. I did not say a word until we were inside my kitchen. The house was warm and smelled of old coffee and lemon polish. It was a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of the Sterling estate or the chaotic ruin of Tyrell's living room. I pulled out a chair for him. He sat down heavily like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was cracked. "What happened back there?" "Richard said there were drugs. You said there was gravel. The police, they looked at me like I was a criminal. I went to the cabinet and poured him a glass of water. I placed it in front of him. Then I walked to the hallway closet where I kept my wall safe. I spun the dial. The tumblers clicked into place with a sound I had always found comforting. Precision, order, truth. I reached inside and pulled out the heavy oilcloth bundle I had retrieved from under the garage floor. I also grabbed the file folder of financial documents and the small digital recorder. I walked back to the table and sat opposite my son. "Drink the water, Tyrell," I said gently. "You are going to need it." He took a sip, his eyes fixed on the bundle in my hands. "Richard was lying to you, son," I began. "He has been lying to you from the day you met him. But tonight, the lies stop. Tonight you see the world as it really is." I unwrapped the oilcloth. The overhead kitchen light hit the contents and exploded into 1,000 fractured rainbows. The pile of rough, uncut diamonds sat on the table like forbidden candy. Next to them lay the heavy gold Patek Philippe watch and the bearer bonds. Tyrell gasped. He pulled back in his chair as if the items were radioactive. "What is this?" he asked. Is this real?" "It is real," I said. It is about $10 million worth of stolen conflict diamonds and assets from the Vanguard heist and the Moretti estate, and until a few hours ago it was inside the teddy bear your daughter was sleeping with. Tyrell shook his head violently. No, that is impossible. Richard gave that to her. He said it was a collector's item. He wouldn't. I pushed the file folder across the table. Open it, Tyrell. He hesitated, then opened the cover. His eyes scanned the first page. It was the incorporation document for North Star Logistics. Look at the signature line, I said. He looked. His face went pale. That is my signature, he whispered. But I never created this company. I do not know what North Star Logistics is. You signed a stack of papers for Richard 3 months ago, didn't you? I asked. He told you it was for tax purposes. Or maybe an investment opportunity for the family trust. Tyrell looked up, tears welling in his eyes. He said he was making me a partner. He said he wanted to secure Zoe's future. He put a whole stack in front of me. I just signed. I trusted him, Dad. He is family. He made you the CEO of a shell company used to launder money. I said, my voice hard but not angry. I needed him to hear this. I needed it to hurt so he would wake up. North Star Logistics leased the warehouse where these diamonds were stored. Blue Horizon Imports. Another company in your name received wire transfers from the Cayman Islands. You are not a partner, Tyrell. You are a patsy. You are the fall guy. Tyrell flipped through the pages. Document after document, loan applications, insurance policies, all with his signature, all pointing to him as the mastermind of a criminal enterprise he knew nothing about. He set me up. Tyrell choked out. He was going to send me to prison. It is worse than that, I said. I picked up the digital recorder. I had transferred the audio from the bug I planted on the driver. Listen. I pressed play. The tiny speaker crackled. Then Richard Sterling's voice filled my kitchen. It was the voice of a man Tyrell had looked up to for a decade. A man he had tried to impress. A man he called Dad. He is collateral damage, Richard's voice screamed from the recording. I need those diamonds back before the cartel arrives tomorrow. If Tyrell has to go to prison for drug trafficking so I can get my property back from police evidence, then so be it. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Tyrell put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. He let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. It was the sound of a man's soul breaking. He had worshipped Richard. He had borrowed money he could not repay to buy a house he did not need just to fit into Richard's world. He had let Richard dictate where Zoe went to school, what car he drove, and how he lived his life. And the whole time Richard looked at him and saw nothing but a disposable shield. And Victoria Tyrell whispered through his hands. She was there. She carried the bear. She knew Dad. She had to know. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. She is his daughter Tyrell. She grew up in that world. Maybe she did not know the specifics. Maybe she thought it was just tax evasion. But tonight, when Richard slapped her, she woke up too. But that does not matter right now. What matters is you. What matters is Zoe. Tyrell lifted his head. His eyes were red, but the shock was fading. In its place was something else. Pain. Deep, agonizing pain. I loved her, he said. I tried so hard to be good enough for them. I worked 80-hour weeks. I took on debt. I ignored you, Dad. I ignored my own father to please a man who was planning to bury me. I am so sorry. He looked at me with such shame that it broke my heart. I am so sorry I let him treat you like garbage, Tyrell said. Tonight at dinner. The way he spoke to you. And I just sat there. I am a coward. You are not a coward, I said firmly. You are a man who loves his family and was taken advantage of by predators, but now you know. The blindfold is off. The question is not what you did yesterday. The question is, what are you going to do tonight? Tyrell looked at the diamonds. He looked at the documents. He looked at the recorder. He took a deep breath. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He sat up straighter. The trembling stopped. We have to go to the police, he said. We have to show them this. We will, I said. But not the local police. Sheriff Higgins is on Richard's payroll. That is why the raid happened so fast. If we go to him, these documents will disappear, and these diamonds will end up back in Richard's pocket, and we will end up in a cell or a ditch. Then what do we do? Tyrell asked. His voice was steady now. He looked at me not as his elderly father, but as the man who used to catch bad guys for a living. We are going to finish this, I said. Richard has a deadline. Tomorrow night. He owes money to the Vargas cartel. That is why he is desperate. That is why he made mistakes. We are going to use that desperation against him. I stood up and walked to the window. The street was quiet. We are not going to run, Tyrell, I said, turning back to him. We are not going to hide. We are going to hunt. We are going to set a trap so big that Richard Sterling and everyone connected to him will fall into it. And you are going to help me bait it, me, Tyrell asked. Yes. You are the only one he trusts to be weak. He thinks you are broken. He thinks you are sitting in a jail cell right now crying for a lawyer. We are going to use that. We are going to make him think he won. Tyrell looked at the pile of evidence one last time. He reached out and closed the file folder. He looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw my son. Not Victoria's husband. Not Richard's puppet. My son. Tell me what to do, Dad, he said. I was about to outline the plan when a sound cut through the quiet house. Knock, knock, knock. It was a frantic, desperate pounding on my front door. I signaled Tyrell to be quiet. I picked up my revolver from the counter. I moved to the hallway, my movements silent. Tyrell followed close behind me. I checked the peephole. I expected to see the sheriff, or the driver, or a hitman. I saw a woman. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. Her hair was disheveled. She was wearing a coat over her pajamas, and she was shivering violently, but it was the bruise on her cheek that stood out the most. A dark, angry purple mark blooming on her pale skin. It was Victoria. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. She almost fell inside. She looked at me, then she saw Tyrell standing in the hallway. She crumbled. Tyrell, she sobbed, reaching out for him. I stepped between them. I did not lower the gun. Give me one reason why I should not throw you off my porch, Victoria, I said. You stood there and watched them raid his house. You carried the bear. I did not know about the diamonds, Frank, I swear, she cried. I knew Daddy was in trouble. I knew he needed to move some assets, but I did not know he was going to frame Tyrell. I thought he was just hiding money from the IRS. And that makes it okay, I asked. No, she wept. No. But he kicked me out. After the police left. After he slapped me. He told me I was useless. He told Mom to change the locks. He said he was going to burn it all down if he had to. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and vengeance. I know where he is meeting them, Frank. I heard him on the phone with the cartel. I know where the exchange is supposed to happen. And I know about the insurance policy on the house. He is planning to torch the mansion tomorrow night to collect the fire insurance since the theft scam failed. Tyrell stepped forward. He looked at his wife. He looked at the bruise on her face. He did not hug her. He did not comfort her. He looked at her with the cold eyes of a stranger. Why are you here? Victoria Tyrell asked. Because I want to stop him, she said. I want to save Zoe, and because I have nowhere else to go. I looked at Tyrell. He nodded once. A sharp, decisive movement. Let her in, Dad, he said. We need a witness, and she just volunteered. I stepped aside. Victoria walked into the house, bringing the cold wind with her. The team was assembled, the evidence was ready, and the hunter was about to set the snare. I closed the front door, shutting out the bitter wind, but the chill remained inside the room. Victoria stood in the center of my small kitchen, shivering uncontrollably. The water from the melted snow on her coat dripped onto the linoleum floor, creating a dark puddle around her expensive boots. She looked like a shipwreck survivor, but I was not ready to throw her a lifeline just yet. I kept my hand near the revolver sitting on the counter. In my line of work, I learned that a crying woman can be just as dangerous as a man with a gun, especially when that woman has been sleeping in the enemy's camp for a decade. Sit down, I said, pointing to the wooden chair furthest from the door. My voice was devoid of warmth. I was not speaking to my daughter-in-law. I was speaking to a potential hostile witness. Victoria collapsed into the chair. She buried her face in her hands, and her shoulders shook with fresh sobs. Tyrell stood by the sink, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at his wife with a mixture of pity and revulsion. He wanted to comfort her. I could see his instinct fighting against his new reality. He took a half step forward, then stopped. He remembered the documents. He remembered the signature line that she had witnessed. Stop crying, Victoria, I said sharply. Tears are not currency in this house, not tonight. You say you want to help. You say you want to save Zoe. Prove it. Victoria looked up. Her mascara was smeared around her eyes, making her look like a bruised raccoon. The mark on her cheek where Richard had struck her was turning a deep, angry purple. I swear, Frank, she choked out. I did not know about the frame job. I knew Daddy was moving money. I knew he was hiding assets from the bankruptcy courts, but I never thought he would hurt Tyrell. I never thought he would risk Zoe. You watched him hand that bear to our daughter, Tyrell said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. You knew what was inside it. I thought it was cash, Victoria pleaded, looking at her husband. He told me it was emergency cash in case the accounts got frozen. He said he was protecting her inheritance. I believed him, Tyrell. He is my father. He has always been the one who fixed everything. He did not fix anything, I interrupted. He broke everything. And you helped him hold the hammer. Now tell me what you know. You said you know where the meeting is. You said you know about the fire. Start talking or get out of my house. Victoria took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so bad she dropped it on the table. He is meeting the Vargas contact at the old North Star Logistics warehouse, she said. The one on the riverfront. It is listed in Tyrell's name. I nodded. It made sense. If the deal went bad and bodies were found, Tyrell would be the owner of record. Richard was consistent, I had to give him that. When I asked. Tomorrow night, she said. Midnight. He has to deliver the diamonds and $2 million in cash. If he does not, they said they would kill him. I looked at Tyrell. He was pale. And the fire, I asked, leaning forward. What did you mean about the fire? Victoria squeezed her eyes shut as if trying to block out the memory. After the police left, she whispered. After he hit me, he went into his study. He thought I had left, but I was listening from the hallway. He called his insurance broker. He confirmed the coverage on our house, Tyrell, the policy he made us upgrade last month. Tyrell gripped the edge of the sink so hard his knuckles turned white. He asked if the policy covered total loss due to accidental fire. Victoria continued. He asked how fast the payout would be. Then he called a man named Calloway. I know him. He is a fixer. Daddy used years ago for a warehouse fire. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Arson was a desperate man's game. Richard realized the theft scam had failed. The police found gravel, not diamonds. He could not claim the theft insurance. So he was moving to Plan B, burn the assets, or rather burn the house that contained the alleged assets. He is going to burn our house, Tyrell said, his voice barely a whisper, with us inside it. He thinks you will be at a hotel, Victoria said quickly. He thinks since the police raided the place, you would not stay there tonight. He wants to torch it to claim the structure value and the contents. He does not care about the house, Tyrell. He needs the liquidity. He needs cash to pay the cartel what he can, since he thinks the diamonds are lost. He does not think they are lost, I said, correcting her. He thinks I have them, or he thinks Tyrell has them. That is why he is desperate. I stood up and paced the small kitchen. The picture was complete. Richard Sterling was a cornered rat. He was willing to burn down his daughter's home and sell his son-in-law to the cartel to survive another day. He had no loyalty, no morality, just a terrifying drive for self-preservation. I looked at Victoria. She looked broken. But broken things can be sharp. Do you hate him? I asked. Victoria looked at me. The fear in her eyes hardened into something else. Something cold. He hit me, she said. Me. He hit me in front of the police. He called me a wretch. He was willing to let Tyrell go to prison. Yes, Frank, I hate him. I hate him for making me a part of this. Good, I said, because I need you to go back to him. Victoria's eyes widened. No, I cannot. He will kill me. He will not kill you, I said, not if you give him what he wants. I picked up the fake bear from the counter, the one filled with gravel. You are going to go back there tonight. You are going to tell him you came here to confront Tyrell. You are going to tell him that Tyrell confessed. You are going to tell him that Tyrell has the diamonds and he is hiding them at the North Star warehouse waiting to make a deal with the police. Why? Tyrell asked, confused. Why would we tell him that? Because we need him at that warehouse, I said. We need him there with the cartel, and we need him to think he has the upper hand. If he thinks Tyrell is trying to cut a deal, he will come running to stop it. He will bring the cartel to the warehouse to get the diamonds from Tyrell instead of paying them. He will try to let the cartel kill Tyrell to tie up the loose ends. Victoria shook her head frantically. This is suicide. You are sending Tyrell into a trap. I am not sending Tyrell into a trap. I said, my voice low and dangerous. I am building one, and Richard is going to walk right into it thinking he is the hunter. I looked at Victoria. You are the bait, Victoria. You have to make him believe you are still on his side. You have to tell him you stole the location from Tyrell. You have to cry. You have to beg him for forgiveness. You have to be the daddy's girl one last time. Can you do that?" Victoria looked at her husband. Tyrell did not look away this time. He held her gaze. "Do it for Zoe," Tyrell said. "If you ever loved her, do this." Victoria wiped her face. She stood up. She straightened her coat. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. She did not look like the socialite she was yesterday. She looked like a soldier going to the front lines. "I will do it," she said. "I will tell him." I handed her a burner phone I kept in my emergency kit. "Use this to call me when he takes the bait." I said, "Do not use your own phone. He might be monitoring it." Victoria took the phone. She walked to the door, then stopped. "Frank," she said, not turning around. "If this goes wrong, if he hurts me, tell Zoe I tried to fix it." "He won't touch you," I said. "Because you are bringing him hope, and hope makes men blind." She opened the door and disappeared into the night. I locked the bolt behind her. The room felt empty but electric. Tyrell looked at me. "Are we really doing this, Dad?" he asked. "Are we really going up against a cartel and a desperate psychopath?" "We are," I said, "but we are not doing it alone." I picked up my old Nokia phone, the one I kept charged for only one reason. I scrolled through the contacts until I found the name. It had been 5 years since I dialed it. I pressed call. It rang once, twice. Then a gruff voice answered. "Yeah." "Miller," I said. "It is Frank Moore." There was a pause on the line, then a chuckle. "Frank, I thought you were dead. We're playing golf in Florida." "I am too busy for golf," I said. "Listen, Miller, I know you are still chasing the Vanguard diamond case. I know it is the cold case that keeps you up at night." "What about it?" Miller asked, his tone shifting instantly from friendly to professional. "I found the retirement fund," I said. "All of it. The diamonds, the watch, the bonds, and I have the man who stole them, who Miller demanded. Richard Sterling," I said, "and he is meeting the Vargas cartel tomorrow night to sell them." "Jesus," Frank Miller breathed. "You are sitting on a powder keg," I know I said, "and I am about to light the fuse, but I need a cleanup crew. I am setting a sting, Miller. I am serving them up on a silver platter. Do you want your badge back or not?" "Tell me where Miller said." I told him the address of the North Star warehouse. "Bring the cavalry, Miller," I said, "and bring the news crews. I want the world to see this." I hung up the phone. I looked at Tyrell. "Get your coat, son," I said. "We have a warehouse to prepare. We are going to turn that place into a theater. And Richard Sterling is going to be the star of a tragedy he wrote himself." The North Star Logistics warehouse was a rotting carcass of steel and concrete sitting on the edge of the industrial district. It was a monument to my son's stolen identity and Richard Sterling's greed. The wind howled through the broken windows, creating a mournful whistle that sounded like ghosts crying out for justice. I pulled my car into the loading bay, avoiding the shattered glass and puddles of stagnant water. Tyrell sat next to me, gripping the dashboard. He looked at the looming structure and shivered. This was the place on paper where he was supposed to be the CEO. In reality, it was just a dark hole where dirty money went to die. We got out of the car. The air inside smelled of rust and diesel. I opened the trunk and pulled out the duffel bag containing my equipment. I did not have the high-tech gear of the modern FBI, but I had something better. I had the tools of a man who knew how to improvise. I handed Tyrell a roll of heavy-duty duct tape and a bundle of fiber optic cables. "I need you to tape these along the underside of the catwalk," I instructed him, pointing up into the darkness. "Do not let them hang loose. If Richard sees a wire, the whole play falls apart." Tyrell nodded. He did not ask questions. He grabbed the ladder and started climbing. I watched him for a moment. He was terrified. I could see it in the way his legs shook on the rungs, but he kept climbing. He was doing this for Zoe. That kind of love can make a coward into a soldier faster than any boot camp. I went to work on the ground floor. I set up the stage. In the center of the vast empty space, I placed a single wooden table and 2 chairs. I positioned them carefully. I wanted Richard to sit facing the riverside of the building. That way the moonlight coming through the high windows would backlight him, making him an easy target for the cameras I was about to hide. I moved to the structural pillars surrounding the central area. I wedged small wireless cameras into the cracks in the concrete. These were not police issue. I bought them from a private investigator friend years ago. They transmitted a signal to a secure server that Miller and his team were already monitoring. I tested the angles on my tablet. Camera 1 showed the table. Camera 2 showed the entrance. Camera 3 showed the loading bay doors. Every inch of the kill zone was covered. I checked the lighting. It was too dark. I needed Richard to feel safe enough to talk, but anxious enough to make mistakes. I found the breaker box. Half the fuses were blown, but I managed to get a single row of overhead sodium lights to flicker on. They cast a sickly yellow glow over the center of the warehouse, leaving the corners in deep shadow. It was perfect. It looked like an interrogation room. Victoria called me on the burner phone. Her voice was trembling. "He bought it," she whispered. "He thinks I am on his side. He thinks Tyrell is here waiting to hand over the diamonds to the cartel to save his own skin." "Is he coming?" I asked. "Yes, he is leaving the house now. And Frank, he is not alone. He called the Vargas contact. He told them to bring muscle. He said he wants to clean up the mess tonight." I hung up. Clean up the mess. That was a euphemism for murder. Richard was not coming to negotiate. He was coming to execute his son-in-law and take the money. I looked up at Tyrell, who was descending the ladder. "Is it done?" I asked. He nodded, wiping grease from his hands onto his coat. "The wires are hidden. The microphones are active." "Good. Now get out of sight." Tyrell looked at the table. "I should sit there, Dad," he said. "He expects to see me." "No," I said firmly. "He expects a victim. He is going to get a predator. You go up to the catwalk, stay in the shadows, do not come down until I give the signal or until the shooting starts." Tyrell grabbed my arm. His grip was strong. "Dad, if this goes south, if they start shooting, you stay down," I ordered. "You have a daughter to raise. I have lived my life. Do not make me waste my sacrifice." He looked at me with tears in his eyes, then turned and climbed back up into the darkness. I was alone. I sat down in the chair facing the entrance. I placed the oilcloth bundle on the table. I unwrapped it, revealing the diamonds and the watch. They glittered under the yellow light, cold and indifferent to the blood that had been spilled for them. I checked my revolver one last time. I spun the cylinder. It was heavy, comforting. I placed it in my lap, covering it with my coat. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind. In the silence, my mind drifted back to Martha, my wife. She died 5 years ago quietly in her sleep. She was the gentle one. She was the one who taught Tyrell to paint and to love jazz. I was the one who taught him how to balance a checkbook and how to change a tire. I always thought I was the protector. But sitting here in this freezing warehouse, I realized she was the strong one. She held us together with love. I was holding us together with lies and guns. I could almost hear her voice. "Frank, you are a stubborn old mule. Watch out for our boy." "I am watching, Martha," I whispered to the empty air. "I am watching." I thought about Zoe, 10 years old. She should be dreaming about unicorns and ice cream. Instead, she was probably awake in a strange bed, wondering why her father was in handcuffs and her grandfather was gone. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost warmed the air around me. Richard Sterling had stolen her innocence. He had turned her birthday into a crime scene. For that sin, there was no forgiveness. There was only judgment. I was not afraid of dying. At 68, death is not a stranger. It is a neighbor you wave to occasionally. I was afraid of failing. I was afraid that Richard would win, that money would beat truth, that the bad guys would ride off into the sunset while the good guys rotted in prison. "Not tonight," I said aloud. "Not on my watch." I checked the time. Midnight. They were late. Power plays. They wanted me to sweat. They wanted Tyrell to be nervous. But I was not Tyrell. I was a man who had stared down money launderers in Bogota and arms dealers in Berlin. I knew the game. Then I heard it. The sound of engines. Big engines. I opened my eyes. Through the high windows, I saw beams of light cutting through the darkness outside. 1 car, 2 cars, 3. They were coming in force. The tires crunched over the broken glass in the parking lot. Car doors slammed. Heavy, confident footsteps echoed on the concrete. I did not move. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the table next to the diamonds. My breathing was slow. My heart was a drum beating a rhythm of war. The metal rolling door at the front of the warehouse began to rattle. Someone was sliding it up. The rusty chain groaned in protest. A slice of moonlight widened at the bottom of the door. Then the headlights of the lead SUV blinded me. Shadows lengthened across the floor. Long, distorted silhouettes of men holding weapons. I saw Richard. He was in the center, wearing a long cashmere coat that looked out of place in this filth. He walked with a swagger. He thought he was walking into a surrender. He stopped 10 feet from the table. He squinted into the yellow light, trying to see who was sitting in the chair. "Tyrell," he called out. His voice echoed off the steel beams. "I see you came to your senses. Do you have my property?" I leaned forward into the light. "Hello, Richard," I said. Richard froze. The swagger evaporated. "Frank," he hissed. "Where is Tyrell?" "He is unavailable," I said, my voice echoing calmly. "So you have to deal with me." Richard sneered. He snapped his fingers. 4 men stepped out from behind him. They were big, they were armed, and they did not look like they were here to talk. "You are a foolish old man," Richard said, stepping closer, his eyes fixed on the diamonds. "You should have stayed home. Now I have to pay the cleaning crew extra." I smiled. It was a cold smile, the smile of a man who knows the trap has been sprung. "Come and get it, Richard," I said. "But remember, greed is a heavy burden to carry." Richard nodded to the men. "Kill him," he said casually, as if ordering a coffee. The men raised their weapons, and then the world exploded. The metal door rolled up with a shriek that sounded like a dying animal. The noise echoed off the steel beams of the warehouse and settled into the dust at my feet. I sat perfectly still. My hands were resting on the table next to the oilcloth bundle. Under the table, my foot was inching toward the leg of the chair, ready to kick. I watched them walk in. There were 5 of them. 4 men who looked like they were carved out of granite and dressed in cheap suits that bulged around the armpits. And then there was Richard Sterling. He walked in the center. He was wearing a camel hair coat that probably cost more than my first house. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the sickly yellow sodium lights overhead. He did not look like a man coming to a criminal meeting. He looked like a CEO arriving for a board meeting where he held all the voting shares. He stopped 10 feet away from the table. The 4 guards fanned out behind him, forming a semicircle of violence. Richard squinted into the light. He looked at the empty chair opposite me. He looked at the shadows in the rafters. Then he looked at me. "Where is he, Frank?" Richard asked. His voice was calm, but there was a razor blade hidden in the silk. "Where is my son-in-law?" "He is not coming, Richard," I said. My voice did not shake. I channeled every ounce of authority I had left from my bureau days. Tyrell realized he did not have the stomach for this. He realized he could not look you in the eye after what you did. So he sent me to negotiate the surrender. Richard threw his head back and laughed. It was a dry barking sound. Surrender. That is a rich word coming from a man sitting alone in a condemned warehouse. You are not here to negotiate, Frank. You are here to deliver my property and then vanish. I honestly expected better from Tyrell. I thought he would at least have the courage to beg for his life in person. But I suppose I should not be surprised. Tyrell has always been a disappointment. He took a step closer, his eyes locking onto the diamonds. "Is that it?" he asked, pointing a manicured finger at the bundle. "That is it," I said. 10 million in uncut stones, the watch, the bonds, everything you stole, everything you tried to pin on my family. Richard sighed, shaking his head with mock pity. "I did not try to pin it on them, Frank. I succeeded. Do you know how easy it was? It was pathetic, really. I put a stack of documents in front of Tyrell and told him it was for a family trust. He did not even read them. He just looked at me with those big puppy dog eyes and signed his life away. He thanked me, Frank. He actually thanked me for the privilege of becoming a money launderer. He is weak. He is a follower. Men like Tyrell are born to be used by men like me. It is the natural order of things." I gripped the edge of the table. I knew Tyrell was listening up in the catwalks. I hoped he was hearing every word. I hoped the pain of this truth was burning away the last of his admiration for this monster. "He trusted you," I said quietly. "He loved you like a father. And that was his mistake." Richard sneered. "Love is a liability. Look where it got you, Frank. You are sitting here about to die for a son who was too stupid to protect himself. And for what? To save a house that the bank is going to take anyway. To save a reputation that is already ruined. You represent everything I despise. You played by the rules your whole life. You counted beans for the government. And look at you. You are old, you are poor, and you are alone. I am not the one who owes the Vargas cartel $5 million by midnight," I said. Richard stiffened. The arrogance slipped for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of genuine fear. "How do you know that name?" he hissed. "I know a lot of things, Richard," I said, leaning forward. "I know you paid off the harbor master in Antwerp. I know you bribed Sheriff Higgins with $50,000 to raid my son's house. But I am curious about one thing. The police report for the Vanguard heist was buried very deep. You needed help from the inside to get the case files suppressed. Who did you pay at the district attorney's office?" Richard smirked. He checked his watch. He thought I was stalling. He thought I was just an old man wanting to know how the magic trick was done before the curtain fell. He had no idea the camera in the pillar behind him was recording the sweat on his brow. "You really want to know?" Richard asked. "Fine, since you are not going to be sharing this with anyone." It was Assistant DA Miller, not your friend Miller, his cousin, and it was not a bribe, Frank. It was a partnership, just like my partnership with Councilman Davies, who rezoned this warehouse so I could use it for storage. You see, Frank, the system you served so faithfully, it works for me. It has always worked for me. Everyone has a price, even you. I nodded slowly. Councilman Davies. That was a name Miller had suspected for years but never had proof. Now we had it on tape. "And the insurance policy," I asked. "The one on Tyrell's life. Was that your idea, or did Meredith help you with that one?" Richard shrugged. "Meredith is a pragmatist. She knows that sometimes you have to prune the branches to save the tree. Tyrell was worth more dead than alive. It is just simple math. The accident was scheduled for next week. A slippery road, a brake failure, quick and clean. Zoe would have cried for a month, but she is young. She would have forgotten him. And with the inheritance, we would have sent her to the best boarding schools in Switzerland. We would have fixed the damage you and your son caused with your mediocrity." My hand tightened around the revolver hidden in my lap. It took every ounce of my willpower not to pull the trigger right then. He was talking about murdering my son as if it were a business transaction. "You are a monster, Richard," I said. "I am a survivor." He snapped. He was losing patience. "Enough of this. I have a schedule to keep. Give me the diamonds, Frank. Walk away, and maybe I will let you live long enough to see Tyrell go to prison for my crimes." I looked at the diamonds, then I looked at Richard. "No," I said. Richard blinked. "Excuse me." I said no. I stood up slowly, my knees popping in the silence. "You are not getting the diamonds. You are not getting Tyrell. And you are certainly not getting Zoe." Richard's face turned a deep shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged. He had never been told no in his life. Not by a bank, not by a woman, and certainly not by a man he considered beneath him. "Kill him!" Richard screamed. He pointed at me, his hand shaking with rage. "Kill him and take the bag." The 4 guards raised their weapons. I saw the black barrels of automatic rifles coming up. I saw the intent in their eyes. They were not hesitating. I did not reach for my gun. Not yet. I kicked the table leg with all the strength I had left. The heavy wooden table flipped over, crashing onto its side. It formed a temporary barricade between me and the bullets. At the exact same moment, I grabbed the remote trigger in my pocket and squeezed. Boom! The charges I had planted in the ventilation ducts exploded. They were not high explosives. They were smoke canisters. Military-grade smoke grenades I had saved from a raid 20 years ago. Thick gray smoke erupted from the floor vents and the ceiling. It filled the center of the warehouse instantly. It was a wall of impenetrable fog. Gunfire erupted. Bang, bang, bang. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Bullets chewed into the wooden table, sending splinters flying into my face. I dove to the floor, rolling toward the concrete pillar where I had stashed my second weapon. I heard Richard screaming, "Stop shooting, you idiots! You will hit the diamonds! Get him! Get the bag!" I scrambled on my hands and knees. The smoke was acrid, burning my throat. I could not see my hand in front of my face, but I knew the layout. I had measured it, 3 feet to the right, 2 feet forward. Something slammed into my left shoulder. It felt like a sledgehammer. The force of the impact spun me around. I hit the concrete floor hard. My shoulder went numb, then exploded in white-hot agony. I had been hit. I gritted my teeth, stifling a scream. I reached up and touched my coat. It was wet. Warm, sticky blood was soaking through the wool. I forced myself to focus. Pain is just information. I was still conscious. I could still move my fingers. The bullet had missed the bone. I crawled behind the pillar. I pulled my revolver. I peered through the swirling gray smoke. I could see the muzzle flashes of the guards' rifles. They were firing blindly into the area where the table used to be. I saw Richard's silhouette. He was standing near the entrance, coughing and waving his arms. He was trying to direct his men, but chaos had taken over. I leaned back against the pillar, breathing heavily. My vision was swimming. The loss of blood was making me dizzy. But I felt a strange sense of calm. The trap was sprung. The confession was recorded. Now we just had to survive the finale. I heard heavy boots crunching on the glass nearby. One of the guards was flanking me. He was coming through the smoke. I raised my gun. My hand was steady despite the pain. I waited. A figure emerged from the fog. He was huge. He had a shotgun raised. I fired. One shot. The guard yelled and dropped his weapon, clutching his knee. He fell back into the smoke. Richard's voice cut through the noise. "He is over there by the pillar. Flank him. Surround him. He is just one old man." I slumped against the cold concrete. I pressed my hand against my bleeding shoulder. I looked up at the catwalks hidden in the darkness above the smoke. I let out a breath that turned into a bloody cough. I smiled, a grim, blood-stained smile. "You are wrong, Richard." I whispered to the chaos. "You made the biggest mistake of your life. You thought I came alone." And then from the darkness above, the heavens opened up. The sound that followed my statement was not the voice of God, but the roar of tactical percussion grenades shattering the skylights above us. Glass rained down like jagged diamonds slicing through the thick gray smoke. Before Richard's men could even lift their eyes to the ceiling, the warehouse was flooded with blinding white beams from above. The buzzing of drones filled the air, sounding like a swarm of angry mechanical hornets. They dipped and dove through the broken windows, their red laser sights dancing across the chests of the hired thugs. Then the ropes dropped. Black-clad figures descended from the darkness with the speed and precision of spiders. They hit the ground rolling and came up with weapons raised. At the same time, the main bay doors behind Richard exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. A specialized armored vehicle rammed through the metal sheeting, tearing it like wet paper. The noise was deafening, a symphony of twisted metal and shouting voices. "FBI, drop your weapons. Get on the ground. Now." The commands did not sound like requests. They were walls of sound pushing against the confusion. Richard's hired muscle did not stand a chance. These were low-level enforcers used to intimidating shopkeepers and unarmed debtors. They were not ready for a federal tactical response team. I saw the shotgunner who had tried to flank me drop his weapon and throw his hands up so fast he nearly dislocated his shoulders. The other 3 guards were tackled before they could even disengage the safeties on their rifles. I stayed slumped against the concrete pillar, pressing my hand to my bleeding shoulder. Through the dissipating smoke, I saw Miller. He was not wearing a suit today. He was wearing full tactical gear with FBI emblazoned in yellow across his chest. He moved through the chaos like a conductor directing an orchestra of justice. He pointed to the corners. He pointed to the suspects. He checked his watch. "Secure the perimeter." Miller shouted, "I want a full sweep. No one leaves this building without bracelets." The firefight I had feared never happened. It was a domination, a complete and total overwhelming force that crushed Richard's criminal empire in less than 60 seconds. The only shots fired were the ones Richard's men had wasted on a wooden table. I pulled myself up, using the pillar for support. My legs felt heavy, and the room was spinning slightly, but I had to see him. I had to see Richard's face. I looked toward the center of the room. Richard was standing alone. His cashmere coat was covered in dust. His hands were empty. He looked around wildly, his eyes darting from the FBI agents to the exits. He was not looking for a lawyer. He was looking for a mouse hole. He was a rat, and the ship was sinking fast. He spotted the service door on the east wall. It was a rusted metal slab half obscured by shadows. The FBI team was focused on cuffing the guards near the main entrance. Richard saw his opening. He turned and ran. He did not run with dignity. He ran with a desperate, flailing motion, slipping on the wet concrete, scrambling over the debris. He abandoned his men. He abandoned his pride. He was running toward freedom, leaving everyone else to pay his debt. I wanted to shout to warn Miller, but I did not have the breath. I watched Richard reach the door. He grabbed the handle and shoved it open. He stumbled out into the alleyway, thinking he had made it, thinking he had outsmarted the system one last time. I limped toward the door. I had to see the end. I reached the threshold just in time to see Richard stop dead in his tracks. He was not alone in the alley. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the dumpster. He was wearing a grease-stained coat, and his face was streaked with dirt from the catwalks. It was Tyrell. He stood directly in Richard's path, blocking the narrow exit. He did not have a gun. He did not have a weapon. He just stood there, his feet planted wide, his hands balled into fists at his sides. Richard skidded to a halt. He looked at Tyrell, and for a second relief washed over his face. He thought he saw the weak, compliant son-in-law he had bullied for a decade. He thought he saw a way out. Tyrell. Richard gasped, his chest heaving. "Thank God. Listen to me. We have to go. My car is parked around the block. If we leave now, we can make it to the airfield. I have a plane waiting." Tyrell did not move. He stared at Richard with eyes that were harder than the concrete walls around them. "I am not going anywhere," Richard Tyrell said. His voice was low, but it carried a weight I had never heard before. "Don't be an idiot." Richard snapped, his old arrogance flashing back for a brief second. "Do you know what happens if they catch us? We both go down. I will tell them you were the ringleader. I will tell them everything was your idea. But if you help me escape, I will take care of you. I have money, Tyrell. Hidden accounts. Millions. I will give you half. Just move out of the way." Tyrell took a step forward. He stepped into the pool of light from the street lamp. "You do not have millions," Richard Tyrell said. "You have nothing. You are bankrupt, and you are a liar." Richard's face twisted. He realized bribery would not work. He tried intimidation. "Get out of my way, you ungrateful little parasite," Richard snarled, lunging forward. "I made you. I gave you a career. I gave you a house. I gave you my daughter. Without me, you are nothing but an architectural draftsman with a mountain of debt. Move, or I will destroy you." Richard raised his hand to shove Tyrell aside, just like he had shoved him emotionally for 10 years. He reached out to grab Tyrell's collar. Tyrell did not flinch. He did not cower. He moved. It was a motion of pure kinetic release. Tyrell stepped into the lunge, pivoting his hips. He brought his right fist up in a tight, powerful arc. It was not a wild swing. It was the punch of a man who had been holding back a scream for 10 years. His fist connected with Richard's jaw with a sickening crack. The force of the blow lifted Richard off his feet. He spun in the air and crashed into the pile of garbage bags against the wall. He slid down, landing in a heap of filth and snow. He did not get up. He lay there groaning, clutching his broken face, blood streaming from his lip. Tyrell stood over him. He was breathing hard, shaking out his hand. He looked down at the man who had controlled every aspect of his life. "You did not make me," Tyrell whispered. "You almost broke me, but you failed." I leaned against the doorframe, clutching my shoulder. Tears pricked my eyes. My son had finally found his fight. FBI agents swarmed into the alley, their weapons drawn. They surrounded Richard, screaming commands. Richard did not resist. He just curled into a ball, whimpering. Back inside the warehouse, the cleanup was underway. I limped back toward the center of the room. Miller was standing over a man who was on his knees, his hands cuffed behind his back. It was Sheriff Higgins. The corrupt lawman was sweating profusely. He was trying to talk his way out of it, his voice high and pitchy. "This is a misunderstanding, Agent Miller," Higgins stammered. "I was working undercover. I was conducting my own investigation. I was just about to arrest Sterling myself." Miller looked at Higgins with pure disgust. He reached into Higgins' pocket and pulled out a burner phone. "Save it," Higgins Miller said. "We have the wiretaps. We have the bank transfers. And we have the testimony of your deputy who flipped on you 10 minutes ago. You are done." Miller looked up and saw me. He walked over, his expression softening. He looked at the blood on my coat. "You look like hell," Frank Miller said, signaling for a medic. "I feel like I just went 12 rounds with a truck," I admitted, wincing as I sat down on a crate. "But it was worth it." "Did we get everything?" Miller nodded. "We secured the diamonds, the watch, the documents, and we have Sterling on tape ordering a hit. It is over, Frank. The net is closed." I looked around the warehouse. It was a scene of controlled chaos. Evidence technicians were already snapping photos. The smell of smoke was fading, replaced by the crisp night air coming through the open doors. Just then, 2 agents dragged Richard back into the building. His face was swelling rapidly where Tyrell had hit him. His expensive coat was ruined. He looked small, pathetic. He saw me sitting on the crate. He stopped struggling against the agents. He stared at me with eyes full of hate. "You ruined everything," Richard spat, blood spraying from his mouth. "You jealous old man. You destroyed your own family just to spite me." I did not say a word. I just pointed to the entrance. A police cruiser had pulled up to the loading bay. The lights were flashing, casting red and blue shadows across the floor. The back door opened. Victoria stepped out. She was not wearing handcuffs. She was wrapped in a thick blanket. She looked tired, but her head was held high. And she was not alone. Walking beside her, holding her hand tightly, was Zoe. A female agent was escorting them, but Victoria was the one leading the way. She walked straight toward us, her eyes fixed on her father. Richard's jaw dropped. He looked at Victoria, then at the freedom she clearly possessed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "Victoria," Richard croaked. What are you doing? Why aren't you arrested? Tell them. Tell them it was Tyrell. Victoria stopped 5 feet from him. She pulled Zoe close to her, shielding the girl's eyes from the sight of her grandfather in cuffs. I told them everything, Dad, Victoria said, her voice steady and clear. I told them about the insurance fraud. I told them about the warehouse fire you planned. I told them about the bear. Richard's face went white. You told them. I am a witness for the prosecution, Dad, she said. I made a deal. Richard let out a scream that was not human. It was the sound of a narcissist realizing his reflection had shattered. He lunged toward her, but the chains held him back. You traitor, he screamed, foaming at the mouth. You ungrateful little witch. I gave you everything. I bought you that life. You sold me out. You sold your own father out. Victoria looked at him with pity. You sold me out first, she said softly, when you hit me, when you tried to frame my husband, when you put a tracker in my daughter's toy. You taught me that business comes first, right, Dad? Well, I just made the best business decision of my life. I cut my losses. Richard began to thrash, violently screaming obscenities. Concone Victoria do, Nabandung Tau. Where is she? Victoria did not flinch. She turned her back on him. She knelt down and hugged Zoe. She buried her face in the girl's hair. It is okay, baby. Victoria whispered loud enough for Richard to hear as he was dragged away. The bad man cannot hurt us anymore. We are safe. Tyrell walked over to them. He stood over his wife and daughter. He put his hand on Victoria's shoulder. She looked up at him. There was a long road ahead of them, a road of healing and rebuilding trust. But for the first time in 10 years, they were standing on solid ground. I watched them from my crate as the medic started cutting away my coat to treat my shoulder. The pain was sharp, but the feeling in my chest was warm. The numbers finally balanced. The debt was paid. And the family was whole. Miller handed me a bottle of water. Not bad for a retired bean counter, Miller said, smiling. I took a sip, watching the flashing lights of the police van carrying Richard Sterling away into the dark night. I am not retired, Miller, I said, closing my eyes. I am just self-employed. And business is good. The courtroom was sterile and smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat in the back row, my left arm in a sling, nursing the bullet wound that throbbed with every beat of my heart. Tyrell sat next to me. He looked tired, but for the first time in years, he sat up straight. His shoulders were not hunched under the weight of someone else's expectations. We watched as the federal prosecutor laid out the case against Richard and Meredith Sterling. It was not a trial. It was an autopsy of a corrupt life. The evidence was overwhelming. My friend Miller had done his job with terrifying efficiency. He presented the diamonds, the watch, and the bearer bonds as Exhibit A through C, but the real nail in the coffin was the audio recording from the warehouse. The jury listened in stunned silence as Richard's voice filled the room, casually ordering the murder of his own son-in-law. I watched the jurors' faces. They looked at Richard not with anger, but with revulsion. He was not a criminal mastermind to them anymore. He was something broken and ugly. Richard sat at the defense table, staring at the wall. He had aged 20 years in 3 months. His hair was white and thinning. His expensive suit hung off his frame like a costume on a scarecrow. Meredith sat beside him, weeping silently into a tissue. She tried to play the victim, claiming she was a dutiful wife who knew nothing of her husband's business. But the prosecution played the wiretaps where she discussed the insurance payouts and the best time to stage the warehouse fire. Her tears dried up instantly when she realized her own voice had condemned her. The verdict came back in less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, grand larceny. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for white-collar predators, sentenced them to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. When the gavel came down, Richard did not scream. He did not fight. He just looked back at me. His eyes were empty. He was already dead. The prison cell was just the box they would bury him in. But justice is rarely clean. It leaves scars, and the deepest scars were on Victoria. She sat on the other side of the aisle alone. She had testified against her parents for 3 grueling days. She detailed every secret account, every bribe, every lie. She destroyed her own family to save her daughter. Because of her cooperation, the district attorney offered her immunity. She would not go to prison. But she did not walk away free. The government seized everything. The mansion on the hill, the cars, the jewelry, even the trust funds Richard had set up were liquidated to pay restitution to the victims of his schemes. Victoria Sterling, the princess of the social scene, was now penniless. I watched her walk out of the courthouse. She was wearing a simple coat bought from a thrift store. She carried her life in 2 suitcases. She stopped when she saw Tyrell waiting by the curb. They stood there for a long moment. The space between them was filled with 10 years of lies and 1 night of shared trauma. "I am sorry, Tyrell," Victoria said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know sorry does not fix it. I know I broke us." Tyrell looked at her. He did not reach out to hold her. The trust was gone, and trust is harder to rebuild than a house. But he looked at the photo of Zoe he kept in his wallet. "You saved her," Tyrell said. "In the end, you chose her over them. That matters." "Can I come home?" Victoria asked. "Not to the big house. I know that is gone. Just to wherever you are." Tyrell looked at me. I nodded slightly. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It is about refusing to let the poison kill you. "We are renting a small apartment near Dad's place," Tyrell said. "It has 2 bedrooms, one for Zoe, one for us. But Victoria, things are different now. I am the husband. I make the decisions, and we live within our means. No more lies, no more secrets." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. She did not argue. She did not complain. She just picked up her suitcase and followed him to his old sedan. They had a long road ahead. Maybe they would make it. Maybe they wouldn't. But at least now they were walking on solid ground. I did not go with them. I had one more stop to make. The hospital. My shoulder was healing, but the infection risk was high, so the doctors wanted to keep me for observation. I sat in the hospital bed watching the news on the small television mounted on the wall. The headlines screamed about the fall of the Sterling Empire. They showed footage of the raid. They called me a hero. A nurse walked in, followed by 2 men in suits. One was Miller, the other was the mayor. "Mr. Moore, the mayor," said, flashing a politician's smile. "We want to present you with the city's Medal of Valor. What you did was extraordinary. You took down a major crime syndicate single-handed." He held out a velvet box containing a gold medal. I looked at it. It was shiny, pointless. "No thank you," I said. The mayor blinked. "Excuse me." I said, "No thank you," I repeated. "I do not want a medal. I did not do this for the city. I did not do this for glory. I did this because a man tried to hurt my family. That is not valor, Mr. Mayor. That is duty. Give that medal to the officer who took a bullet in the raid, or give it to the social worker helping Zoe process the trauma. I just want to go home and sleep in my own bed." Miller smiled. He knew I would say that. He ushered the confused mayor out of the room. "You are a stubborn old mule," Frank Miller said, sitting in the chair by the bed. "But you did good. The streets are safer because of you." I looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. It was over. The nightmare was finished. Or so I thought. There was a knock on the door. A man walked in. He was dressed in an expensive gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. He looked like a shark that had learned to walk upright. "Mr. Moore," he said, "my name is Arthur Pendergast. I was Richard Sterling's estate attorney." I sat up. My shoulder throbbed. "Richard has no estate," I said. "The government seized it all." "That is correct regarding his personal assets," Pendergast said, opening his briefcase. "However, there is a matter of a document Richard executed 3 days before his arrest, a document regarding the guardianship of his granddaughter, Zoe Moore." He pulled out a thick sheaf of papers. Richard anticipated that he might be incapacitated. Pendergast continued, his voice smooth and oily. He activated a clause in an old family trust, a trust that owns the intellectual property rights to a software patent Richard purchased years ago. It is the only asset the FBI missed because it was held in a blind trust for Zoe. "So what is the problem?" I asked. "If it is for Zoe, then good. Let her have it." "The problem, Mr. Moore, is the stipulations attached to the trust," Pendergast said, sliding the paper onto my bed tray. "Richard stipulated that if he were to be incarcerated, the control of this trust and the guardianship of the beneficiary would transfer to a third-party executor. A man named Victor Vargas." My blood ran cold. Vargas, the cartel boss, the man Richard owed money to. Richard had sold his granddaughter to the cartel. He had used the trust as a way to pay his debt. He gave them legal claim over Zoe's financial future and, by extension, a legal foothold to drag us into court for years. The document states that Mr. Vargas has the right to determine Zoe's education and residence to ensure the proper management of her assets, Pendergast said. Essentially, Mr. Vargas now has a legal claim to custody of your granddaughter. I stared at the paper. Richard was in prison, but his hand was reaching out from behind the bars trying to choke us one last time. He knew the cartel would not care about Zoe's education. They would use this to extort us, to terrorize us. I looked at Miller. His face was pale. "Is this legal?" I asked. "On paper?" Maybe, Miller said. "We will fight it, Frank. But it could take years." I looked at Pendergast. I looked at his smug face. I realized then that the war was not over. The battle of the warehouse was won, but the war for Zoe's soul had just begun. I reached for the pitcher of water on the tray and poured a glass. My hand was steady. "Get out of my room, Mr. Pendergast," I said. "Mr. Moore, you need to understand the gravity." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You tell Mr. Vargas that I am not Richard Sterling. I do not make deals with devils. And you tell him that if he thinks a piece of paper is going to let him touch one hair on my granddaughter's head, he should ask Richard what happened to the last man who tried." Pendergast gathered his papers and left. Miller looked at me. "What are we going to do?" Frank Miller asked. "Vargas is dangerous. This is not a white-collar criminal. This is a warlord." I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I ripped the IV tape off my hand. "Where are you going?" Miller asked, standing up. "I am going home to clean my gun, Miller," I said, standing up on shaky legs. Richard thought he could sell us to the wolves. He forgot that wolves bleed just like everyone else. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. "Let them come," I whispered. "I am ready." It has been exactly 365 days since I walked out of that hospital room and told the world to come and get me. I sat on my front porch this morning watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, and for the first time in a decade, I did not feel the need to check the perimeter. My service revolver is locked in the safe downstairs. It has been cleaned, oiled, and wrapped in a silicone cloth. I have not touched it since the night the Vargas cartel lawyers tried to serve me with papers claiming custody of my granddaughter. They thought they could intimidate me with legal threats and dark sedans parked down the street. They thought Frank Moore was just a retired bean counter with a lucky streak. They were wrong. They did not know that the check from the Vanguard Insurance Group had arrived 2 days after my discharge. It was a finder's fee, 10% of the recovered assets. When you recover $10 million in diamonds and bearer bonds, that fee is enough to buy a lot of freedom. It was enough to hire the kind of lawyers that make cartel attorneys look like amateurs. We did not just fight the custody claim, we buried it. We buried it under a mountain of motions and countersuits until Victor Vargas decided that Zoe Moore was too expensive to acquire. The wolves circled, but they realized this particular sheepdog had iron teeth. They moved on to easier prey. I used the rest of the money to clean up the mess Richard Sterling had left behind. I sat down with Tyrell at his kitchen table. The big house on the hill was gone, seized by the feds. They were living in a 2-bedroom rental near the park. It was small. The carpet was worn. The faucet leaked. But it was theirs. I put a check on the table. It was the exact amount of the debt Tyrell had incurred trying to keep up with the Sterlings. The credit cards, the personal loans, the car leases. I told him this was not a gift, it was a reset button. I told him that a man who owes money to another man is a slave, but a man who owes nothing is a king even if he lives in a shack. Tyrell cried that day. He did not cry like a child. He cried like a man who had been holding his breath for 10 years and could finally exhale. We paid off every cent. We burned the loan documents in a metal trash can in the backyard. We watched the paper turn to ash and float up into the night sky. It was the most beautiful fire I have ever seen. Tyrell is different now. He is working for a small architecture firm downtown. He is not designing mansions for millionaires who do not pay their bills. He is designing community centers and libraries. He comes home with sawdust on his boots and a smile that reaches his eyes. He drives a 5-year-old sedan that has a dent in the bumper, and he loves it because he owns it. He is not the CEO of a shell company anymore. He is a father. He is a husband. He is my son. And Victoria. That was the hardest road. She did not go to prison, but she served a sentence of her own. She lost her friends. She lost her status. The country club set turned their backs on her the moment the handcuffs clicked on her father's wrists. She had to learn who she was without the sterling name to protect her. She got a job, a real job. She works as an event coordinator for a nonprofit. It is hard work, long hours, low pay. But I see her. I watch her. She wakes up early. She makes breakfast. She helps Zoe with her homework. She does not drink wine at 2 p.m. anymore. There is a humility in her now that was never there before. The bruise on her cheek healed long ago, but the memory of it changed her. She looks at Tyrell not as a project to be improved, but as a partner to be cherished. They fight sometimes. Real fights about laundry and grocery bills, not silent wars about power and resentment. They are healing. It is slow. It is messy. But it is real. Today is Saturday. It is Zoe's 11th birthday. Last year, her birthday was a black tie affair at a mansion filled with people who did not know her middle name. There were caterers and ice sculptures and a bear filled with stolen diamonds. Today, there are no ice sculptures. There is only the smell of hickory smoke and my secret barbecue sauce. I am standing at the grill in my backyard. The November air is crisp, but the fire keeps me warm. I am turning the ribs, making sure the glaze caramelizes just right. Cooking is like accounting. It requires patience, precision, and respect for the process. You cannot rush a good rib, just like you cannot rush justice. I look across the yard. Tyrell is setting up a folding table on the grass. He is laughing at something Victoria said. She is carrying a bowl of potato salad, wearing jeans and a sweater. She looks younger, lighter. She catches my eye and smiles. It is a genuine smile. A smile that says thank you. A smile that says we made it. And then there is Zoe. She is running through the piles of autumn leaves with the neighbor's dog. She is wearing a hoodie and sneakers. She is laughing. That sound. That pure, unadulterated laughter. It is the best return on investment I have ever earned. She is not the frightened little girl sitting on a couch while a SWAT team tore her house apart. She is a child again. I take the ribs off the grill. Dinner is served, I call out. We sit around the picnic table. The plates are paper. The napkins are flimsy. The cups are plastic. But the food is hot and the company is honest. We eat with our hands. We get sauce on our faces. We talk about school. We talk about the football game. We do not talk about Richard. We do not talk about the past. We talk about tomorrow. After dinner, Tyrell brings out the cake. It is a chocolate sheet cake from the grocery store. It has 11 candles on it. We sing happy birthday. Zoe closes her eyes and makes a wish. She blows out the candles in one breath. Open your presents, baby, Tyrell says. She opens the gift from her parents first. It is a new bicycle, not a fancy electric one, just a sturdy blue bike with a basket. She screams with delight. She hugs them both. Then she turns to me. Grandpa, she says, do you have a present for me? I reach under the bench. I pull out a small box. It is wrapped in plain brown paper. It is not heavy. It does not tick. It does not blink. She tears the paper off. Inside there are 2 things. The first is a small blue book, a savings passbook. What is this? She asks, flipping through the pages. I lean forward. That is a freedom fund, Zoe. I put a little bit of money in there for you. Not millions, just enough. But here is the rule. You cannot touch it until you are 21. And every month I want you to go to the bank with me and deposit $5 of your own allowance. I'm going to teach you how compound interest works. I am going to teach you how to make your money work for you so you never have to depend on anyone else. Money is a tool, Zoe, not a god. You control it. You do not let it control you. She nods, her eyes serious. She understands. She has seen what happens when money becomes a master. What is the other thing? She asks, picking up the second item. It is a leather-bound journal. The leather is thick and smells of earth. On the cover, I have embossed her initials, ZM. I open the first page. I have written an inscription. For Zoe, write your own story. Never let anyone else hold the pen. This is for the truth, I say. Last year, people tried to use you to hide their lies. They thought because you were small, you did not matter. They thought they could rewrite your life to save their own skins. This book is for you to write down what you see, what you feel, what you know to be true. Because in this world, people will try to tell you who you are. They will try to tell you what you saw. You write it down. You keep the record. The truth is the only weapon that never runs out of ammunition. Zoe runs her hand over the leather cover. She looks at me. Her eyes are old for her age. She has seen too much. but she is strong. She has more blood in her veins. Thanks, Grandpa, she whispers. She stands up and walks around the table. She wraps her arms around my neck. She smells of barbecue smoke and chocolate cake and childhood. I hold her tight. I close my eyes and I breathe in the moment. This is it. This is what I fought for. This is what I bled for. We spend the rest of the evening sitting by the fire pit. The sun goes down and the stars come out. Tyrell gets his guitar and plays a few chords. Victoria hums along. Zoe is sitting on the grass writing in her new journal by the light of the fire. I sit back in my Adirondack chair. My shoulder aches a little in the cold. It is a good ache. It is a reminder that I am alive. It is a reminder that I stood my ground. I think about Richard Sterling sitting in a 6x8 cell in a federal penitentiary. I think about the diamonds sitting in an evidence locker. I think about the millions of dollars that destroyed so many lives. People say diamonds are forever. They say they are the hardest substance on earth. They say they are unbreakable. They are wrong. I saw a diamond shatter a family. I saw a diamond turn a father against his daughter. I saw a diamond turn a man into a monster. Diamonds are just rocks, cold, hard rocks that reflect whatever light you shine on them. If you shine greed on them, they reflect greed. If you shine hate on them, they reflect hate. I look at my son. I look at my daughter-in-law. I look at my granddaughter. They are not diamonds. They are flesh and blood. They are soft. They are vulnerable. They break easily, but they heal. They knit back together stronger than before. They are warm. They are alive. I reach into my pocket and pull out my old pocket knife. The one I used to cut open the bear. I turn it over in my hand. I do not need to carry it for protection anymore. I carry it to whittle sticks for marshmallows. I am Frank Moore. I am 69 years old. I am a father. I am a grandfather. And I am the man who proved that you do not need a badge to enforce the law. You just need a spine. I look at the camera inside my mind, addressing the invisible audience that has followed this journey. People say diamonds are forever. Dead wrong. Only truth and blood are indestructible. I am Frank Moore, and this is how I protected my family. Here is the lesson learned and the call to action CTA written in the same voice and style as the script. Throughout this ordeal, I realized that the greatest lies are often wrapped in the most expensive packaging. Richard Sterling believed that power came from leverage, from holding debt over someone's head or holding a secret over their heart. He thought that because he had money, he was untouchable. He thought that because I was a pensioner driving an old Ford, I was invisible. But he forgot the most fundamental law of nature: a predator will always underestimate a protector until it is too late. The true tragedy of this story isn't the crime itself, it's the silence that allowed it to grow. My son Tyrell and his wife Victoria spent 10 years swallowing their pride, ignoring their gut instincts, and buying into an illusion because they were afraid of the truth. They thought that if they just played along, eventually they would be accepted. They learned the hard way that you cannot buy respect from someone who sees you as a commodity. We often think of legacy as what we leave behind in our wills, houses, jewelry stocks. But I look at Zoe now writing in her journal by the fire, and I know that is not true. Your legacy is not what you own, it is what you defend. It is the courage you show when the odds are stacked against you. It is the ability to look at a diamond and see a rock, and look at your family and see a treasure. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Do not let anyone appraise your worth based on their bank account. Do not let fear keep you in a cage, gilded with debt, and never ever apologize for fighting to keep your conscience clean. The world is full of Richard Sterlings. Be a Frank Moore. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button. It helps more people hear the truth. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who tried to control your life with money? Tell me your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes open.